Tonight we enter Eridu, where the wind moves over low ruins like breath across sleeping clay. In the early 20th century, archaeologists uncovered layers of temples there, each built upon the bones of an older shrine. The British Museum, the University of Pennsylvania, and later scholars of Mesopotamia would help preserve and study tablets that carried fragments of this ancient world. Some were administrative, some were hymns, some were stranger than that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows quiet, tell us where you're listening from and what local time surrounds you now. You are standing beneath a pale evening sky in southern Mesopotamia, where the land lies flat and open, with reeds trembling in the marsh air. The Euphrates moves somewhere beyond sight, slow and brown, carrying silt, fish, secrets, and the kind of silence that makes a person speak more softly without knowing why. The heat of the day still clings to the ground. Your sandals press into dust mixed with ancient brick powder. The smell is dry earth, river mud, and faint salt from old waters that have wandered away. Around you, broken walls rise only a little above the plain, yet they once held prayers older than most kingdoms. This is Eridu. Records confirm that Sumerian tradition remembered Eridu as one of the earliest cities, a sacred settlement associated with deep beginnings. Archaeologists found a long sequence of temple levels there, suggesting centuries of rebuilding on the same holy place. Not one temple, but many. Not one sacred moment, but a repeating return. That is the first quiet clue. People did not simply abandon the old ground. They came back. They rebuilt. They placed new bricks over old bricks, as though the earth beneath them still had a pulse. Even when walls cracked, even when roofs fell, the place remained meaningful. You can almost hear the work. Mud bricks are pressed by hand. Reeds are bundled. Water is carried in jars that leave damp rings on shoulders and hips. Someone smooths plaster with patient fingers. Someone else watches the sky, probably pretending to supervise, which is a human tradition nearly as ancient as civilization itself. Nothing here feels sudden. The mystery does not arrive like thunder. It gathers slowly, like dust at the edge of a doorway. In later Sumerian memory, the great gods and the Anunnaki stand among the powers shaping the world. Yet the records also gesture towards something beneath them, something older than their familiar names. Long before recorded history, there is a landscape of waters, cities, divine workers, strange teachers, and kings who reign for impossible spans. These are not simple stories placed neatly on a shelf. They are fragments. They are weathered pieces of a larger pattern. And you, tonight, follow those fragments. A mainstream historical fact is steady beneath your feet. Sumerian cities flourished in southern Mesopotamia during the 4th and 3rd millennia before the Common Era. Scholars from major universities have long studied how writing, urban life, temple economies, and kingship grew there together. Clay tablets made this world unusually visible, because clay can survive where parchment and memory vanish. Clay is stubborn, thankfully so. A quirky tidbit waits at the edge of the ruin. Some later traditions claim that before the Great Flood, wisdom came to humans through semi-divine sages linked with the waters. They were sometimes imagined in forms that blur human and fish, which is a wonderfully odd career choice for a civilizing teacher. Still, the image lingers because it speaks to something profound. Knowledge rises from below. That phrase may sound like a dream, but Sumerian thought often placed beginnings in watery depth. Beneath the visible land lay an imagined deep, not merely a puddle with confidence, but a cosmic source. From there came freshness, fertility, danger, and forgotten authority. In your ears, the wind shifts across the mound. The ruin becomes less like a dead place and more like a sleeping threshold. You see low mud brick lines catching the last light. You imagine workers, priests, singers, and scribes moving through courtyards that no longer exist. Their voices do not return clearly. They return as rhythm. The ancient records do not say, in a modern way, here is exactly what happened. They do something more difficult. They preserve how people remembered existence before explanation became tidy. There is still debate among scholars about how much of these traditions reflects historical memory, priestly theology, political storytelling, or mythic imagination. Some researchers treat the ancient king lists as ideological texts, shaped by city pride and sacred authority. Others ask whether behind their impossible numbers lie memories of real dynasties, catastrophes, and social changes blurred by time. Nobody can hold the whole answer. That is not a failure. It is part of the texture. You look again at Eridu. The city is not grand in the way later empires become grand. There are no marble avenues here, no conqueror carved with smug eyebrows into a mountain face. There is only earth, river, temple, and horizon. Yet from such places, human history begins to speak in writing. The first tablets are not bedtime poetry. Sadly for the romantic soul, many are accounts, lists, measures, jars, sheep, grain, and labour. Civilization introduces itself by counting things. It is very impressive and slightly disappointing. But within this practical world, myth survives. A tablet can record barley. Another can record gods. Both belong to the same civilization. One keeps the stomach alive. The other keeps the darkness from feeling empty. As night deepens, the sky over the plain becomes immense. Stars appear, one by one, like holes pricked in a dark fabric. Ancient watchers would have known the slow turn of seasons, the swelling rivers, the moods of marshland, the hunger of fields. They did not separate survival from sacred order as easily as modern people do. For them, the world was arranged through relationship. Waters had power, cities had destinies. Temples were not just buildings, but meeting points between fragile humans and vast unseen systems. A god was not merely an idea. A god had a house, a table, offerings, songs, servants, and expectations. And somewhere behind the named gods, behind their houses and titles, there seems to be an older stage. A world before the Anunnaki is not presented as a clean historical chapter. It appears in hints: primeval waters, ancient cities, pre-flood kings, strange sages, and labouring divine beings. The evidence is scattered across texts written and copied over long centuries. Some pieces come from Sumerian tradition. Others survive through Akkadian versions and later Mesopotamian memory. The result is like seeing a buried wall through shifting sand. You do not see the whole structure. You see enough to know something was built. Perhaps that is why Eridu matters tonight. It stands not only as a ruin, but as a symbol of layered remembering. Each temple rests on an earlier temple. Each story rests on an older story. Each divine name may stand above forces that were imagined before names became stable. The ground is cool now. You feel the day leaving the clay. A distant bird cries from the marsh. Then silence gathers again. In that silence, the first mystery becomes clearer, though not solved. Sumerian records do not merely speak of gods ruling the world. They seem to preserve the feeling that the world was already ancient when those gods took their places. There were depths before thrones, waters before cities, tusks before humans, patterns before kings, and perhaps beneath the tablets, beneath the temple levels, beneath the sacred names written by careful hands, there remains the faint outline of a world older than memory itself, a world not fully lost, only sleeping. You hold the image of clay in your mind, not as a dead material, but as something waiting. A lump of river earth sits in a scribe's palm. It is damp, cool, and heavy with the smell of banks, reeds, fish, and slow brown water. A sharpened reed presses into it. A mark appears, then another. A thought becomes a wedge. This is how memory hardens. The first signs do not arrive as grand prophecy. They begin with practical needs, with grain, workers, animals, rations, and offerings. Modern excavations at Uruk and other southern Mesopotamian sites confirm that early writing grew from systems of accounting. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have long studied how these marks slowly changed into one of the world's earliest writing systems. That fact is plain enough, yet it is also quietly strange. The first world preserved in writing is not a world of kings boasting about glory. It is a world of lists, barley, beer, sheep, cloth, land, names, numbers. Somebody, somewhere, wanted to know where the goats had gone. In a way, civilization begins with suspicion and bookkeeping, which feels almost too believable. But among later tablets, the clay becomes less ordinary. You begin to see hymns, myths, temple songs, royal stories, and records of cosmic order. The signs no longer merely count what can be weighed, they begin to hold what cannot be touched. They hold beginnings. They hold divine labour. They hold fear of floods, longing for order, and memories of places older than empire. The tablet becomes a small night sky. Each mark is a star. Ancient scribes copied older texts in schoolrooms where boys sat with aching hands and dusty knees. They practiced signs again and again, turning sound into symbol. Their teachers corrected them, no doubt with the ancient warmth of people who believe the young are ruining everything. The clay preserved not only wisdom, but mistakes, exercises, and half-remembered traditions. That is one reason the mystery deepens. Sumerian records are rarely simple windows. They are layered objects. A tablet might preserve an older tradition copied centuries after its first telling. A myth could be reshaped by temple politics. A king list might combine memory, theology, and civic pride. Clay survives, but survival is not the same as certainty. Still, the fragments speak. They suggest that ancient Mesopotamians imagined existence as older than human society, older even than familiar divine arrangements. Before the named rulers of heaven and earth stand other conditions, less personal and more elemental: waters, darkness, silence, undivided spaces, sacred forces without faces. The world before gods is difficult to describe, because description itself belongs to a later order. So the texts use images. They speak of waters mingling. They remember a deep source beneath the land. They imagine heaven and earth once bound together, then separated. They place cities in a sacred sequence, as though civilization descended into the world from somewhere beyond ordinary human effort. You hear the scratch of reed on clay. It is a small sound, almost insect-like, yet it changes everything. Without that sound, the old stories would have dissolved into air. With it, they become fragile, stubborn objects that can sleep under ruins for thousands of years. A mainstream historical point remains important here. The earliest known cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia date to the late 4th millennium before the Common Era. They are mostly administrative, not mythological. The great myths and literary compositions survive mainly in later copies. That gap matters, and careful scholars treat it with caution. Caution is not dull, it is honest. There is an open debate among Assyriologists about how far back the traditions preserved in later literary tablets truly reach. Some argue that myths copied in the 2nd millennium preserve very ancient oral material. Others warn that every copy belongs to its own political and religious moment. Both views can stand in the same room, awkwardly, like relatives at a temple feast. This is where sleep and scholarship agree. Nothing needs to be forced. You let the clay speak slowly. A tablet does not shout its meaning. It waits for someone patient enough to learn its signs, its grammar, its broken edges, and its missing lines. Often the most powerful part of an ancient text is not what remains, but what has crumbled away. A gap can feel like a doorway. You look at a damaged tablet under soft museum light. The surface is cracked. Some signs are clear, others vanish into roughness. The label beside it may mention a myth, a hymn, or a lexical list, but the object itself says something more basic. Someone wanted this remembered. That desire crosses time with surprising tenderness. A scribe bends over the clay, a teacher recites, a student copies, a temple stores, a city burns. Earth covers the room. Centuries pass. Then a hand lifts the tablet again, and the dead begin speaking in a language that had nearly become dust. A quirky detail comes from scribal training itself. Students often copied lists of signs, animals, professions, stones, woods, and gods. It was not glamorous, but it built the mental architecture of civilization. Imagine learning the universe through vocabulary drills. Even the cosmos apparently needed homework. Through these lists, order is rehearsed. The ancient mind arranges the world by naming it. To name a thing is to give it a place. To place a thing is to reduce fear. Yet the oldest places in Sumerian thought resist neat naming. The deep waters remain mysterious. The time before kingship remains blurred. The first cities seem both earthly and more than earthly. You sense a hidden timeline forming, not like a modern chart, but like layers in damp earth. At the surface are known cities, kings, temples, and scribes. Beneath them lie older traditions of divine order. Deeper still are waters and forces that seem almost pre-divine. Then, somewhere below language, there is the unrecorded world. The world that clay can only point toward. The Anunnaki belong to a divine society already structured by power, duty, and descent. Yet the tablets hint that this society did not emerge from nothing. It rises within a cosmos already marked by depth, separation, labour, and memory. That matters. It means the gods themselves may have inherited a world. Not literally, perhaps not in a way that can be measured with a ruler or placed safely in a university drawer, but narratively, spiritually, imaginatively. The records preserve a sense of pre-existence. Something is always earlier. Something is always underneath. Your fingers hover over the thought. Clay before the gods is not empty clay. It is clay holding the first human attempt to touch deep time. It carries numbers, but also tremors. It carries inventories, but also the unease of origins. It lets us see a civilization watching its own beginnings disappear behind sacred mist. And in that mist, the oldest question remains patient. What existed before the world became a story? The ground opens in layers, and you descend without moving. Eridu is not a single city in the imagination now. It becomes a stack of remembered rooms, one pressed gently upon another, like pages sealed by mud. At the lowest levels, the walls are small and plain. Higher up, the sacred spaces widen, gaining platforms, chambers, offerings, and silence arranged with greater care. The city under silence is built from repetition. A shrine rises, it weathers, it collapses. Then hands return to the same spot. New bricks are laid over old ones, not because the builders lack imagination, although perhaps one tired foreman suggested moving slightly left. They return because the place itself has become important. Sacred geography does not ask for convenience. You feel the roughness of sun-dried brick beneath your palm. The surface flakes a little under your fingers. Fine dust clings to your skin. Somewhere nearby, a reed mat creaks as someone kneels with a basket of offerings. The smell is grain, warm plaster, damp clay, and smoke from a small fire fading into evening. Archaeological work at Eridu revealed a long temple sequence, often described as one of the clearest examples of sacred continuity in early Mesopotamia. Researchers from major institutions have used such layers to understand how ritual centers could develop across centuries. The fact is simple, but its meaning is immense. People kept coming back, not for one generation, not for a passing fashion. They returned across time, rebuilding where their ancestors had built, praying where earlier voices had already thinned into memory. That persistence suggests more than architecture. It suggests inheritance. You stand within a room that is not there anymore. Its walls rise only in your mind, but the floor feels real. A low altar waits ahead. A platform catches the last stripe of light. Outside, marsh birds call, and their cries cross the flat land with a lonely patience. The horizon is wide enough to make human concerns look both tiny and extremely dramatic, as they usually are. The earliest temple levels were modest, yet they mark a remarkable idea. A community had chosen a fixed point where the unseen could be approached. Long before palaces dominated the landscape, before kings learned to carve their importance into stone, the sacred house stood as a centre. The god had a dwelling. The city gathered around that fact. In later tradition, Eridu was linked with the wise god of deep waters, craft, order, and hidden knowledge. This association matters because the place itself seems to sink symbolically toward depth. The ruin is above ground, but its meaning points downward, toward freshwater sources, underground abundance, and an older mystery beneath visible life. The ancient landscape helps explain this. Southern Mesopotamia was shaped by river channels, marshes, floods, and unstable ground. Land emerged, shifted, dried, and drowned. A city might stand near water one century and find the channel wandering away in another. People living there knew that the world was not fixed. It breathed wetly. It changed its mind. Perhaps that is why foundations mattered. To build was to resist change. To rebuild was to speak against disappearance. A temple sequence becomes a human answer to a moving landscape. Here, again. We place the sacred centre here. Again, we insist the world has order. A scholarly debate continues around how early temples functioned in these communities. Some historians emphasize redistribution, storage, and labor organization. Others focus more strongly on ritual life, symbolic power, and the authority of priestly households. The evidence allows both. Because ancient buildings rarely respect modern categories, a temple can store grain and terror. It can organize workers and soothe fear. It can feed bodies and shape time. It can be an office, a theatre, a treasury, and a doorway, all while looking very serious under the sun. This is where the silence thickens. The more you imagine Eridu's layers, the more the city feels like an archive without writing. Before tablets recorded long myths, buildings already recorded choices. Architecture became memory. Foundations became sentences. Rebuilding became a form of belief. Each level says this place remains. You picture workers carrying mud bricks in the heat. Their backs shine with sweat. Their feet sink slightly into damp ground. A child watches from a doorway, chewing something probably not approved by any responsible adult. The ordinary and the sacred share the same dust. That is important. Ancient history is not made only by kings and gods. It is made by people who haul baskets, mend walls, grind grain, wash vessels, and complain softly while doing absolutely necessary work. Their labour holds up the sacred imagination. A quirky tidbit clings to Eridu's later reputation. Some traditions remembered it not merely as old, but as first among cities receiving kingship. That is an enormous claim for a place that eventually became a quiet mound. Cities, like people, sometimes spend their later years reminding everyone they were important before the others arrived. Still, the claim has force. To call Eridu first is to place it near the beginning of organised human destiny. It becomes less a settlement than a threshold. A city appears where wilderness, water, and divine order meet. It is not yet empire. It is not yet bureaucracy in its full, exhausting confidence. It is a sacred beginning. You pause near the imagined altar. The room seems empty, yet not vacant. There is a difference. Emptiness can be plain absence. Vacancy can feel abandoned. This silence feels occupied by all the rituals that once repeated here. Morning after morning, season after season. Offerings are placed, words are murmured, hands are washed. The god is served, and the city continues. In this way, Eridu reveals a pattern older than many surviving stories. Before written myth gives names to cosmic events, Ritual places already arrange the world into layers. Below lies depth and source. At the center stands the temple. Around it grows community. Above it stretches the sky, watched for signs. This vertical imagination becomes a quiet map. You sense water below, dust around, stars above. Human beings stand between them, small but busy, which is our specialty. The city under silence is not dead. It is compressed. Its voices are packed into foundations. Modern excavation can measure walls, date pottery, and compare temple plans. It can show continuity with impressive care. Yet it cannot fully recover what a person felt while stepping into the shrine at dawn. It cannot weigh ore in a basket. It cannot reconstruct the exact shiver of standing before a presence believed to live inside a house of clay. So you listen differently, not by forcing certainty, but by letting the place remain partly hidden. Eridu's layers do not provide a neat answer about what existed before the Anunnaki. They offer something subtler. They show that the sacred world had depth before later divine families became fully organized in text. They show memory descending through architecture, and as night settles over the mound, the buried city seems less like ruins and more like a sleeping stairway. Each step leads downward. Each layer grows older. Each silence holds a room. Before names were given, the world feels wider and less certain. You stand at the edge of a plain where no royal inscription has yet claimed the horizon. The air tastes of dust and river salt. A faint smell of rushes drifts from the marshes, mixed with smoke from low hearths and the warm animal scent of herds settling for night. Nothing has been arranged neatly yet. That is the strange beauty of early memory. It does not always begin with people saying, "Here is our history," perfectly sorted for your convenience. It begins with fragments that seem almost too large for their containers. A list of cities, a list of kings, a line saying kingship descended from heaven. A simple sentence can be very dangerous. The Sumerian king list preserves one of the most haunting claims in ancient literature. It presents kingship not as a human invention, but as something that came down into the world. Modern scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have studied this text as a political and religious composition, shaped by scribal tradition and city rivalry. The record is not modern history. Still, it matters deeply. In the list, kingship begins before the flood, moving through ancient cities with rulers whose reigns stretch across immense spans of time. The numbers are impossible in ordinary human terms. Thousands of years pass under single rulers. Time becomes vast, swollen, and almost dreamlike. You can almost feel the scribe hesitate, or perhaps he does not hesitate at all. Perhaps his hand moves confidently, because he is not trying to satisfy a future historian with a clipboard and a suspicious expression. He is writing a pattern of legitimacy. He is saying that rule itself belongs to a sacred order older than any one dynasty. The city receives kingship. That phrase is important. Kingship is not simply seized. It descends, arrives, transfers, departs. It behaves almost like a living force. A city holds it for a while, then loses it. Another city receives it. Power flows across the land like a river that changes course. In this vision, political authority is ancient, mobile, and more than human. You walk through an imagined city before its name becomes famous. There is no palace towering above everything yet. There are storage rooms, courtyards, shrines, alleys, ovens, baskets, dogs nosing around places they should not nose around. People bargain, sweep, bake, argue, bless children, and worry about water. History begins in ordinary noise, yet above that noise, the idea of kingship hovers like a star. Someone must decide, someone must command labour, settle disputes, defend canals, organise rituals, and look impressive while wearing uncomfortable symbols of authority. Human communities grow, and leadership becomes unavoidable. But the ancient list does not say, People made kingship because irrigation administration became complex. That would be a very sensible sentence. And nobody would fall asleep peacefully to it. The list says kingship descended from heaven. It transforms social order into cosmic event. It makes government sacred, which is efficient, if slightly alarming. A mainstream historical fact stands here with both feet on the ground. By the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, Sumerian city-states had developed kings, temples, councils, and complex systems of labor and redistribution. Inscriptions and tablets show rulers claiming divine favor, building temples, and competing for prestige across southern Mesopotamia. The earthly record is clear. The mythic record is stranger. A quirky detail rests inside the kingless tradition. Some rulers before the flood are said to reign for periods so long that even the most enthusiastic monarch would probably need a nap. These impossible reigns are not mistakes in the simple sense. They are signals that the early world belongs to a different kind of time. Mythic time stretches. It does not tick like a clock beside your bed. It expands around sacred beginnings. The farther back the list goes, the larger the numbers become, as though memory itself grows less human near the source. There is active scholarly debate over what these pre-flood reigns represent. Some researchers see them as symbolic numbers connected to ancient mathematical systems. Others interpret them as theological exaggerations, political claims, or traces of older oral traditions. The careful answer is that the text may be doing several things at once. Ancient texts are inconsiderate like that. They refuse to be only one thing. A king list can be propaganda, theology, memory, and poetry at the same time. It can flatter a city, organize the past, and hint at a world before familiar history. Its purpose is not merely to inform, it persuades the soul. You notice how names begin to work. Once a ruler is named, the past becomes more graspable. A city has a place, a reign has a span, events can be arranged. Yet the earliest names in the list seem to float over something deeper. They are markers placed on a sea too wide to measure. Before names, there are conditions: waters, earth, heaven, power, descent, selection, loss. The list gives names, but the mystery lies beneath the naming. You breathe in the cooling air, somewhere. A pot cracks softly in a fire. A woman laughs in a nearby courtyard. A child cries because bedtime has been declared. That ancient tyranny. Life continues beneath cosmic order, stubborn and intimate. This contrast is the heart of the matter. Sumerian records do not preserve a single flat past. They preserve several pasts at once. There is the lived past of fields, temple, grain, and disputes. There is the royal past of dynasties and cities. There is the sacred past where kingship descends from heaven. And beneath that lies a pre-ordered world where authority has not yet taken familiar shape. The Anunnaki, in later divine systems, belong to a structured cosmos. They judge, assemble, assign fates, and stand within divine hierarchy. Yet the king list implies that order itself has a history. Rule enters the world. It is not simply there from the beginning. That is a subtle difference. If kingship descends, then there was a moment before its descent. If cities receive it, there was a time when cities waited without it. If power moves from place to place, then the sacred system is not fixed stone, but movement. You begin to sense a hidden timeline forming around absence. The earliest world is not empty, but unnamed. It has forces without offices. It has places before titles. It has human settlements before the full drama of kingship settles over them like a heavy cloak. Perhaps this is why ancient records can feel unsettling without becoming loud. They suggest that what seems permanent may have arrived late. Kings, cities, divine councils, even the famous names of gods may stand atop older layers of imagination. The world is already old when authority learns its own name. You look across the plain again. No crown shines there. No carved victory scene commands attention. Only water channels catch moonlight, and the marsh whispers in the dark. Yet somewhere in that quiet, The idea of rule is gathering, waiting to descend, waiting to be received, waiting to be written into clay. And before the names settle into signs, before the lists harden into tradition, the ancient world breathes without labels. Wide, dim, and unfinished, the watery deep remembers what dry land forgets. You stand where the plain softens into marsh, and the earth no longer feels fully certain beneath your feet. Reeds lean together in the dark, insects hum with tiny persistence. Water moves through channels you cannot see, making small sounds like fingers touching cloth. The world seems to begin below you. In Sumerian thought, fresh water was not only useful, it was sacred, hidden, and powerful. Later texts connected the deep subterranean waters with wisdom, fertility, craft, and divine knowledge. Scholars at the University of Chicago and Oxford have long noted how central water was to Mesopotamian religion, economy, and imagination. That fact is steady as a canal bank. Yet the feeling is stranger. The deep is not an ocean in the modern sense. It is a source beneath the land, an unseen reservoir from which life rises. Wells, springs, canals, marshes, and rivers all seem to whisper of it. The visible world drinks from an invisible one. You crouch beside dark water. It smells of mud, reeds, fish, and the green rot of plants returning to earth. Moonlight trembles on the surface. Beneath that faint silver skin, everything is hidden. A fish turns, a root sways. The water accepts every reflection, then breaks it apart. This is how beginnings behave. Ancient stories often place creation near waters because water is both gentle and dangerous. It feeds fields, yet it destroys walls. It carries boats, yet it erases roads. It cleans hands, yet it hides bodies of memory beneath silt. Anyone living in southern Mesopotamia would understand that water makes civilization possible while quietly threatening it. That is a useful arrangement for humility. A canal can turn a desert edge into a garden. A flood can turn a garden into regret. Humans learn quickly that control is temporary, and the river has its own opinions. The primeval waters in Mesopotamian imagination become more than scenery. They form a kind of ancient archive, before cities are named, before kingship descends, before the divine families settle into familiar roles. There is the deep, not silent exactly, but speaking in a language older than speech. You hear it as movement, soft lapping at the bank, a reed bending, the bubble rising from mud. The sound is small, but it suggests depth beneath depth. It feels as though the world has a basement, and someone has left the door slightly open. A mainstream historical point belongs here. Irrigation agriculture helped shape early urban life in southern Mesopotamia. Canals, levees, and managed water-supported fields, temple estates, and growing settlements. Research across major universities and archaeological projects continues to show how water management and social organization develop together. The sacred and the practical meet in the ditch. That may not sound majestic, but it is true. A canal is theology with mud on its ankles. It says that life depends on channeling what is greater than you. It says order is made by guiding flow, not by pretending flow does not exist. A quirky fringe tidbit drifts nearby like a reed boat. Some modern, alternative theories imagine the watery deep as a memory of advanced beings arriving by sea, teaching early humans from boats or hidden coastal worlds. Such claims go far beyond the evidence, but they persist because the ancient texts already make water feel like the doorway of wisdom. Fringe ideas often borrow ancient atmosphere. They take a symbol and turn it into machinery. A fish-cloaked sage becomes a visitor. A cosmic deep becomes a lost laboratory. It is imaginative, certainly. It is also a reminder that mystery attracts decoration, and humans enjoy decorating what they cannot prove. Scholars continue to debate how to interpret these watery images. Some emphasize ecological experience, seeing myth as a reflection of rivers, marshes, and floods. Others focus on temple theology, where the deep becomes a divine realm tied to ritual purity and sacred knowledge. A cautious reading allows landscape and belief to shape each other. The marsh teaches the myth teaches the marsh. You walk along a narrow path raised above black water. It is made from packed reed and mud, and it shifts slightly under your steps. Somewhere in the darkness, a bird beats its wings once, then vanishes into stillness. The air touches your skin with damp fingers. There is comfort here, but not safety. The deep is generous yet never fully obedient. It nourishes the fields that feed temple workers, farmers, fishers, brewers, priests, potters, scribes, and the occasional person pretending to supervise again. It gives clay for tablets and bricks. It gives reeds for pens, mats, boats, and roofs. It gives the material of civilization. Water writes before the scribe writes. It leaves silt. It marks banks. It carves channels. It hides old floors beneath new mud. It lifts and buries. The ancient record is not only pressed into clay by human hands, it is also arranged by the patience of rivers. This makes the idea of a world before the Anunnaki feel less like an empty darkness and more like a submerged order. The deep is not nothing. It is potential. It is the place where forms wait. Gods may rise into names. Cities may rise into walls. Humans may rise into labour. But water is already there, below them all. You imagine ancient people watching a spring? Fresh water appears from the ground, clear and impossible, as though the earth has decided to speak. No wonder such places seemed holy. Something hidden becomes visible. Something beneath gives life to the surface. Perhaps every spring is a small creation story. The tablets preserve this feeling through divine images, sacred houses, and references to the deep. They do not explain it like a textbook. They let it remain alive. Water is source, boundary, memory, and threat. It is the place before order, and the force that order must continually negotiate. That word matters, negotiate. Humans do not conquer the deep. They bargain with it through canals, rituals, offerings, embankments, prayers, and repairs after everything goes wrong. The gods themselves, in myth, often governed by arranging forces that are older and wilder than palace order. So the watery deep becomes a hidden timeline of its own. Before the city there is the spring, before the tablet there is the clay bed, before the temple there is the raised ground above the floodplain, before named divine authority there is the primal source that cannot be ruled completely. You stand still and listen. The night air thickens. The reeds breathe. The dark water accepts the stars and breaks them into trembling fragments. It feels as if the sky has fallen quietly into the marsh, and the world above is being stored below for later remembering. Perhaps that is what the ancient deep does. It keeps what cannot yet be said. It holds beginnings before they become stories. It cradles the old uncertainty from which cities, gods, kings, workers, and written signs slowly emerge. And under the calm surface, beneath reflection and root, the world before names continues to move. Slowly, patiently, unseen. 7 sages step from the edge of remembering, and the night grows watchful. You do not see them clearly at first. You sense movement near the reed beds, where mist hangs low over the dark water. Shapes gather where land and marsh meet. They seem human. They're not fully human. As if the old storytellers could not decide whether wisdom should arrive wearing skin, scales, feathers, or silence. The figures are known in later Mesopotamian tradition as primeval sages, teachers associated with deep knowledge and ancient order. Records from Mesopotamian scholarship describe them as culture bringers, linked with crafts, ritual knowledge, and wisdom granted before the flood. Major university studies of ancient Near Eastern texts treat them as part of a long scribal tradition about knowledge descending into human society. That is the firm ground. The soft ground is stranger. Some accounts imagine these sages with fish-like features or wearing fish cloaks, rising from the waters to teach early humanity. It is a peculiar image, but also a beautiful one. Wisdom does not arrive from a throne. It arrives damp, shimmering, and probably smelling faintly of river weeds. Not glamorous, very memorable. You stand in the hush beside a settlement before dawn. The sky is still dark blue, and the air holds the chill that comes just before the sun returns. A doorway creaks. Somewhere, grain is being ground with a steady stone rhythm. Dogs stir, suspicious of everything recrème, which remains their ancient duty. Then the teacher appears. Perhaps he's not a literal creature from the water. Perhaps he's a memory of priests, craft specialists, ritual experts, or foreign knowledge entering community from the marshes and sea routes. Perhaps he's an image shaped by temple theology, making learning feel older than any living master. Perhaps the answer is not one answer. The sages matter because they stand between worlds. They are not ordinary farmers or kings. They are not the ruling gods themselves. They appear as mediators, crossing from hidden depth into human settlement, bringing skills that make civilization possible. Writing, ritual, planning, purification, building, measurement, counsel. These are not small gifts. A mainstream historical fact helps anchor the dream. Mesopotamian scribal culture placed enormous value on inherited knowledge. Lists, omen texts, rituals, mathematical exercises, and literary compositions were copied across generations. Scholars at institutions such as Yale and the University of Pennsylvania have shown how scribal learning preserved both practical and sacred traditions. The schoolroom becomes a shrine of memory. A student copies signs until his wrist aches. A master corrects mistakes with the chilly patience of someone who has seen too many bad wedges. Clay tablets stack in corners. The smell is damp earth, sweat, reed, and lamp smoke. Knowledge is not floating free. It is drilled into fingers. That makes the sages more haunting. They are mythic versions of the first teachers. They represent a belief that culture was not invented casually by humans bumbling through breakfast. It was received, transmitted, guarded, and perhaps borrowed from powers older than human memory. A quirky fringe tidbit curls at the edge of the reed mat. Modern speculative writers sometimes treat the fish-cloaked sages as evidence of visitors from lost islands, underwater cities, or even the stars. The evidence does not support such certainty, but the fascination is understandable. The ancient image already feels like a doorway left open. When a teacher rises from the water, imagination follows. Still, caution has its own quiet dignity. Scholars debate whether these sages reflect priestly ancestors, mythologized craftsmen, ritual specialists, or symbols of divine wisdom entering the human world. Some see them as part of a wider Mesopotamian pattern, in which knowledge is both powerful and dangerous. Others emphasize their role in linking pre-flood time with later civilization. The debate remains alive because the figures are deliberately liminal. They stand at the threshold. You imagine one moving through a sleeping city. His garment brushes against mud brick. His face is hidden in shadow. He carries no sword. His power is instruction. He knows how to lay a foundation, how to speak a ritual correctly, how to read signs, how to place order where confusion has gathered. That kind of power is quiet. It does not need thunder. A wall built correctly can outlast a boast. A ritual performed correctly can calm a frightened household. A canal measured correctly can feed a city. A sign written correctly can carry a voice beyond death. The sages bring the arts that let human life stretch beyond the fragile body. In that sense, they belong to a world before the familiar divine counsel takes full shape. They suggest that civilization begins not only with command from above, but with teaching from the margins. Not the center speaking downward, but the deep sending knowledge inward. You walk through a workshop in your mind. A potter turns clay. A carpenter smooths wood. A brewer tends jars in a warm room smelling of grain and sour sweetness. A singer practices a hymn under her breath. A ritual specialist washes hands in a bowl of clean water. Each skill is ordinary, but each also holds a trace of sacred inheritance. The sages are scattered through these gestures. They are present whenever technique becomes tradition. They linger when a child learns the right knot, the right measure, the right word, the right time to be silent. Culture is not one invention, it is thousands of remembered motions. The number 7 itself carries weight in later Mesopotamian thought, appearing in ritual, cosmic, and scholarly patterns. Yet the number of sages can vary in traditions, which is a useful reminder that ancient systems are not always as tidy as modern diagrams wish them to be. The past loves exceptions. Even sacred order has loose threads. Those loose threads make the figures feel alive. They're not trapped in a single explanation. They appear in different forms across time, carrying older authority into new contexts. Sometimes they are linked with legendary antiquity. Sometimes they become ancestors of later scholars. Sometimes they seem like memories of a lost instruction given before catastrophe. The pre-flood world becomes a classroom behind a veil. You cannot enter it fully. You can only glimpse the lesson through later copies and traditions. The sages stand there, half turned away, as though their teaching is continuing somewhere just beyond hearing. What did they bring first? The ancient imagination gives many answers, but the deeper answer may be structure. They bring the idea that the world can be ordered through knowledge. Mud can become brick, sound can become sign, water can become canal, fear can become ritual, memory can become tablet. A human being, small and mortal, can learn. That is extraordinary. As the first light rises over the marsh, the figures fade into ordinary morning. Fishermen check nets. Smoke lifts from roofs. Someone curses mildly at a stubborn jar, preserving another universal tradition. The city wakes inside the gift of knowledge without always remembering the giver. That is how old wisdom works. It disappears into use. The 7 sages in the dust do not prove a lost empire or a hidden species. They reveal something subtler and more enduring. Sumerian and Mesopotamian tradition imagined that humanity did not climb from ignorance alone. It was instructed, shaped, corrected, and drawn toward order by powers standing at the border of water and time. And as you listen, the reed beds whisper again. The teachers are gone, yet the lesson remains. 5 sacred cities glimmer across the plain, separated by distance, joined by memory. You see them not as ruins, but as points of dim fire beneath a wide ancient sky. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurupak. Their names move through the old tradition like stones placed across dark water, each one offering a step into a world before ordinary history feels secure. The pattern is strangely calm. In the ancient list of early kingship, these cities hold power before the flood changes everything. Each city receives kingship, keeps it for a span beyond human measure, then passes it onward. The movement is orderly, almost ceremonial, as if authority travels according to a hidden design. Records from Mesopotamian studies confirm that city identity mattered deeply in Sumerian culture. Major research from institutions such as Oxford and the University of Chicago has shown how cities honoured their own gods, temples, traditions, and political claims. A city was not just a place to live, it was a sacred personality. That idea changes the landscape. You walk through the imagined space between settlements at dusk. The ground is cracked in places, damp in others. Wind carries dust, reed pollen, animal smell, and the faint bitterness of smoke. Stars appear early over the flat horizon. There are no mountains to interrupt the sky, so heaven feels enormous and near. Each city answers the darkness differently. Eridu feels low and watery, tied to depth and beginnings. Bad Tibira, remembered in tradition with associations of craft and metalwork, gleams like a furnace in the mind. Larak is more obscure, a name with fewer surviving details, and that obscurity makes it feel almost spectral. Sippar is linked with sunlight in later memory. Shurupak waits with the shadow of flood traditions. A system begins to appear, not a modern map with clean borders and cheerful labels, something older, something ritual. The cities form a sequence, and the sequence suggests that civilization was imagined as a gift moving through selected centers. The sacred order does not belong everywhere at once as it rests, departs, arrives, power migrates. That's a haunting thought. A mainstream historical fact stands beneath the tradition. Early southern Mesopotamia was not one unified kingdom at first, but a landscape of city-states with shifting alliances, rivalries, and sacred identities. Archaeological surveys and inscriptions show that urban centres developed unevenly, each with its own cultic and political life. The mythic pattern turns that historical reality into destiny. Instead of messy competition, the old list gives motion a sacred rhythm. Kingship moves from city to city like a lamp carried carefully through night. The flame may burn too brightly in one place, then pass into another hand. The human scramble for power becomes a cosmic procession. Very tidy, suspiciously tidy. Ancient scribes were not above arranging memory into a shape that served meaning. They knew that a good list can tame chaos, or at least make chaos look properly supervised. A sequence of cities becomes a way to explain why authority exists, why it changes hands, and why one city might claim a deeper connection to the beginning. Yet the pattern is not empty. You pause at Bad Tibera in imagination, where furnaces glow red in the cooling dark. Metalwork was rare, difficult, and almost magical to early observers. Stone and clay are shaped by pressure and fire, but metal seems transformed by hidden knowledge. It melts, shines, hardens, and cuts. No wonder craft could feel sacred. A quirky tidbit belongs here. Bad Tibera's name has often been interpreted in connection with metalworkers, which lets the city shimmer in a modern imagination as a place of ancient smiths. Whether the old associations reflect actual industry, sacred symbolism, or later interpretation, the image is irresistible. The forge becomes a small creation chamber. Inside it, earth changes form. Ore becomes tool. Tool becomes labour. Labour becomes city. A hammer striking metal sounds like order being forced from stubborn matter. It is not gentle, but civilization rarely is. Scholars continue to debate how the 5 pre-flood cities should be understood. Some read them as theological geography, arranging sacred centres into a memory of cosmic order. Others see traces of political rivalry, where later scribes placed favoured cities into an ancient chain of legitimacy. Some cautiously wonder whether older settlement memories linger behind the names. No single reading closes the door. That is fortunate. A closed door is less interesting than a half-open one with dust moving underneath. You travel onward in the mind towards Sipper, where later traditions associate the city with the sun. Dawn there feels different. You imagine pale light spreading across flat roofs, touching temple walls, waking birds, revealing canal lines like dark threads across the fields. If Eridu belongs to depth, Sipper belongs to brightness. The sequence now feels vertical and horizontal at once. Depth, craft, obscurity, light, catastrophe. Of course, the ancient text does not present it so neatly. That pattern is a careful inference. A storyteller's reconstruction from names, associations, and surviving fragments. Still, it helps you feel how the cities might have functioned as more than dots on a clay map. They are stations of meaning. Shilpak, last in the sequence, carries a different weight. It is connected in Mesopotamian flood traditions with the figure warned before destruction. The city becomes a threshold between the world that was and the world that survives. It stands near the edge of forgetting. The air changes there. You imagine a quiet street before rain. The smell of wet dust rises early. People move under low clouds, unaware that later memory will place their city at the hinge of eras. A basket swings from someone's arm. A donkey complains with admirable sincerity. A child splashes in a puddle. Nothing knows it is becoming myth. That is one of history's gentlest cruelties. People live ordinary days, and later generations turn those days into symbols. A city becomes a warning. A flood becomes a boundary. A king becomes a line in a list. The living become material for sacred memory. The 5 cities form a forgotten architecture of time. They show a world arranged before the more familiar divine society becomes dominant in the story. Authority already moves. Sacred centres already matter. Human settlement already stands inside a pattern of descent, transfer, and loss. The Anunnaki may later occupy the high seats of judgment, but the ground below them has already been divided into meaningful places. You feel that ground underfoot. It is uneven, grainy, alive with old heat leaving the soil. Far away, a temple lamp burns. Farther still, another lamp answers. Between them stretch fields, canals, marsh, wild dogs, watchmen, insects, and long paths walked by traders, priests, messengers, and people simply trying to get home before dark. A system can be grand and still smell of mud. That is the beauty of this ancient pattern. It doesn't float above life. It runs through brickwork, grain stores, shrines, workshops, and river crossings. The sacred order is carried by tired bodies and remembered in names. 5 cities, 5 flames, 5 pauses in the long breath of the pre-flood world, and as the night settles over them, you sense that the sequence is not merely a list. It is a map of how ancient people imagined order entering the world, resting briefly in human hands, then moving on before anyone could keep it forever. A world before labour sounds peaceful until you listen closely. You find yourself beneath a pale morning sky, where fields do not yet belong to human hands. The air is cool, touched with the scent of wet clay and crushed reeds. Water lies in shallow channels, reflecting the first light in trembling strips. Nothing is hurried. Nothing is easy. Work is already waiting. In Mesopotamian myth, creation is not always gentle. The gods themselves may toil, dig canals, maintain order, and carry burdens before humanity enters the story. This idea appears most clearly in later traditions where lesser divine beings grow weary of labour and humans are made to take up the work. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and other major centres of ancient Near Eastern study have long treated this theme as one of Mesopotamia's most revealing reflections on society. The fact is steady. The implication is unsettling. Before people become workers, the gods are workers. Before humans bend their backs, divine beings bend theirs. Creation does not begin with leisure, music, and somebody gracefully arranging flowers. It begins with digging. Mud sticks to ankles. Channels must be cleared. Food must be produced. The world needs maintenance. Even heaven has chores. That detail feels almost rude, but also deeply human. The ancient storytellers looked at the endless labour required to keep fields alive, canals open, and temples supplied. Then they imagined that such labour belonged to the structure of the cosmos itself. Work was not an accident. It was woven into existence. You walk beside an unfinished canal. The banks are raw and damp. Reed baskets lie nearby, dark with mud. A wooden tool rests against a mound of earth. Insects gather over the water. The silence here is not empty. It is the silence of a task paused only briefly, as if the workers have stepped away and may return at any moment. In this imagined age, divine labour fills the world. The gods do not yet appear only as distant judges. They are burdened agents in an unfinished landscape. They dig, carry, complain, and endure. The cosmos is not a palace already polished for its rulers. It is a work site with sacred management problems. A quirky tidbit rises from the mythic mud. In some Mesopotamian stories, the complaint of tired divine workers becomes part of the reason humans are created. Humanity, in that view, is not made because the universe needed poetry, although poetry arrived anyway and made itself comfortable. Humans are made because someone needed to handle the workload. It is not the most flattering origin story, yet it is strangely honest. Ancient life was labour. Fields required constant attention. Irrigation channels silted up. Floods damaged walls. Animals needed tending. Grain needed grinding, beer needed brewing, which at least gave civilization something to look forward to. The temple economy depended on many hands performing repeated tasks. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Early Mesopotamian cities relied on organized labor for agriculture, construction, storage, textile production, and temple service. Administrative tablets show rations distributed to workers, including men, women, and children in institutional households. This was not a world floating on myth alone. It was an economy of measured effort. The myths understood that. They transformed social reality into cosmic memory. If humans work because the gods once worked, then every basket lifted and every field cut echoes a divine burden. Labour becomes sacred, but not necessarily pleasant. Sacred work can still make your shoulders ache. You hear the scrape of tools. A group moves along the canal bank lifting wet earth in baskets. Their feet sink softly. Their breath comes in rhythm. One wipes mud from his face with the back of his wrist. Another mutters something that is almost certainly not a hymn, unless hymns were more flexible than we imagine. The ancient world is not sentimental. It knows hunger. It knows heat. It knows the panic of failed crops. It knows that order must be built every day, then rebuilt when water, wind, animals, insects, and human foolishness undo it. The idea of divine labour gives this struggle a cosmic mirror. There is an open scholarly debate over how these labour myths should be read. Some historians see them as theological explanations for human service to the gods. Others view them as reflections of institutional labour systems, where temple and palace households organised large workforces. Some emphasise their philosophical depth, seeing them as ancient meditations on why existence demands effort. The debate remains fertile. Like mud after floodwater, you pause near a low mound where offerings might one day be placed. The morning warms. Birds walk delicately through shallows, stabbing their beaks into the water with perfect seriousness. The land is beautiful, but it does not give itself freely. It asks for sweat. That demand shapes humanity's role. In these myths, humans are not placed above the world as carefree masters. They are inserted into a system already running, already strained, already full of obligations. They arrive not at the beginning of need, but as an answer to it. Perhaps not the answer they would have chosen naturally. Who volunteers to be cosmic staff? Still, there is dignity hidden inside the burden. To serve the gods is also to participate in order. Human work feeds temples, sustains cities, maintains rituals, and keeps the fragile arrangement between heaven, earth, and water from falling apart. The worker is small but not meaningless. Small hands hold large systems. This vision can feel bleak if heard too quickly, but slowly it becomes more complex. The old myths do not say humanity is worthless. They say humanity is necessary. The divine world requires human action. Offerings must be prepared, songs must be sung, fields must be tended, bricks must be made. The sacred house needs mortal hands. The gods may command, but humans continue the pattern. That's a powerful reversal. The world before labour is not a paradise without effort. It is a stage where effort belongs first to beings greater than humans. The later arrival of humanity does not erase toil, it redistributes it. The burden descends, much like kingship descends, entering human history as destiny and daily routine. You feel the weight of an empty basket. It is light for a moment, almost harmless. Then mud fills it. The strap bites the forehead or shoulder. The path stretches ahead. Again and again. The basket is carried, emptied but filled, carried, emptied. Civilization rises from repetition. No wonder the myths remember complaint. Complaint is also ancient. It may be one of humanity's finest inherited arts. Yet beneath the grumbling lies a deeper recognition. To work is to be bound to the world. To be bound is to matter. To matter is to suffer responsibility. The sun climbs higher. The canal glitters. Fields wait for water. In the distance, a settlement begins its day with smoke, animal calls, grinding stones, and the low murmur of people moving toward tasks that feel older than themselves. And in that soft unrest, you sense the hidden world before human service, a world where divine hands carried the first burdens, a world where labour existed before mankind, a world that needed us, perhaps, before it loved us. The making of servants begins in a room of divine unease. You do not enter a shining hall, polished and peaceful. You enter a place of pressure. The air feels close. Lamps burn low. Clay vessels stand near the wall, somewhere beyond the chamber. Water moves through channels, and the sound is steady enough to feel like a command. Something must be solved. In Mesopotamian creation traditions, humanity is shaped to relieve divine labour and maintain the offerings that sustain the gods. Later, Akkadian texts preserve this theme with memorable force, describing human creation from clay and a divine element. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have studied these accounts as windows into ancient ideas of work, ritual, and dependence. The myth is not soft. Human beings are not created merely to admire the sky and enjoy the occasional fig. They are made for service. They are placed inside a system of obligation where food, labour, worship, and order flow upward toward the divine world. It is humbling and perhaps a little insulting. Still, it is not simple cruelty. You see clay gathered from River Earth. It is damp and dark, pressed into a basin, mixed by hands that understand both craft and necessity. The smell rises thickly, mineral and wet, like rain trapped under the ground. The material is lowly, yet full of possibility. Clay can become brick, clay can become tablet, clay can become human. That triple meaning matters. The ancient imagination chooses a substance already central to civilization. Clay builds houses, records accounts, seals jars, shape figurines, and receives the wedge-shaped signs of memory. To say humans are clay is not only to call them fragile, it is to call them formable. The body becomes a shaped thing. A mainstream historical fact gives the myth weight. Mesopotamian daily life depended on clay at nearly every level. Mud brick architecture, pottery, tablets, seals, and figurines all emerged from the same riverine environment. Archaeologists from major research institutions have shown how deeply material culture in southern Mesopotamia was tied to clay, water, and human hands. The myth uses the world people knew. It does not create humanity from a jewel or a thunderbolt. It uses the substance beneath everyone's feet. That choice makes the story intimate. Every wall, bowl, and tablet quietly resembles the human body in origin. You imagine the divine craftsman leaning over the mixture. There is no rush. Creation is careful work. Fingers press, smooth, divide, and shape. The first human is not born from romance, conquest, or accident, but from craft. The maker resembles a potter, a midwife, a ritual expert, and a tired administrator solving a staffing issue. Very sacred, very practical. A quirky tidbit appears in later versions of the tradition. Some texts describe the use of divine blood or flesh in the making of humanity, which gives people a strange double nature. They are clay, but not only clay. They are earth mixed with something that remembers the gods. That is an unsettling inheritance. It means human beings are low and high at once. They are made to serve, yet carry a trace of what they serve. They are mortal, muddy, hungry, and distractible, but also capable of speech, ritual, memory, and longing. A creature made for labour looks up at the stars and asks why. Perhaps that was not in the original work order. Scholars continue to debate how these creation accounts reflect social life. Some interpret them as sacred justification for temple labour and offerings. Others see them as profound reflections on mortality, human dignity, and the burden of consciousness. Some emphasize their political dimension. where hierarchy appears as part of cosmic design. The debate does not weaken the story. It makes it deeper. You stand now in a courtyard where newly made humans might first open their eyes, if myth allowed such a scene. The ground is warm beneath them. The sky is painfully wide. The smell of smoke drifts from a hearth. A goat bleats nearby with total indifference to theology. The first lesson is need. Bodies need water, bodies need grain. Bodies tire, bodies ache. Bodies ask questions that cannot always be answered. To be human in this ancient vision is to be bound to maintenance. You must feed yourself, your household, your city, and the gods. Nothing survives unattended. That idea gives Mesopotamian religion its daily rhythm. Offerings are not occasional decorations. They are part of a recurring relationship. Bread, beer, meat, incense, song, washing, dressing, and ritual care sustain the divine household. The temple functions as a home for the god, and humans become its servants, stewards, and anxious caretakers. You hear bowls being set down. The sound is small. Clay touching clay. A loaf is placed. Beer is poured. Smoke lifts. The ritual is calm, almost domestic. Yet behind it lies the immense claim that the cosmos depends on proper service. Humanity's role is therefore fragile and central. It is fragile because people are made of clay. A fall, a sickness, a bad season, a broken canal, and life can crumble. It is central because without human service, the divine order lacks its earthly rhythm. The servant is not equal to the master, but the household still needs the servant's hands. This is where the story becomes quietly uncomfortable. Modern listeners often want creation myths to flatter humanity. We prefer being chosen for wisdom, love, beauty, or some secret heroic purpose. The Mesopotamian tradition is less eager to compliment us. It says, in effect, you were made because there was work to do. A little rude, but efficient. Yet that rudeness opens into something almost tender. Work means belonging. Service means relationship. Duty means that your actions matter beyond your private life. When you grind grain, carry water, mend a wall, sing a hymn, or place bread before a god, you participate in an ancient structure of exchange. You are needed. Perhaps that is the hidden mercy. The making of servants does not erase mystery. It increases it. Why would divine beings require human offerings? Why would immortal powers depend on mortal hands? Why does clay, shaped for duty, become capable of grief, art, tenderness, and rebellion? The myth does not answer fully. It lets the question breathe. You look at your own hands in the dimness. They are ordinary hands, marked by small lines, able to lift, break, comfort, write, and release. In the ancient story, such hands are the reason humanity exists. Not abstract thought alone, not royal glory. Hands. Hands shape the world. Hands also remember the clay. The first humans, made as servants, stand between mud and divinity. They are not gods, not animals, not tools exactly, and not free in the modern dream of perfect independence. They are living obligations, walking mixtures, burdened with service and haunted by a spark they did not request. And beneath that thought lies the quietest unease of all. Perhaps humanity was created for work, but somewhere in the work, humanity discovered wonder. Fragments beneath Nippur sleep in broken rooms of clay and dust. You enter the city through imagination, while evening settles over its ancient mounds. The air smells of baked earth, old straw, and faint smoke carried from hearths beyond the temple quarter. A dry wind moves over the ruins and lifts powder from the ground, as though the city is exhaling very slowly. Nippur was never only a place. It was a centre of sacred authority, a city whose religious importance reached far beyond its walls. Archaeological work by American expeditions uncovered thousands of tablets there, including school texts, hymns, myths, lexical lists, and administrative records. Scholars from the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Chicago helped make Nippur central to modern study of Sumerian literature. That is the firm fact. The mystery lies in the fragments. You walk through a scribal room that exists now only as an echo. Low benches line the walls. Clay tablets rest in baskets. Reed styluses lie beside damp practice tablets. A lamp smokes in the corner, leaving the smell of oil and soot in the air. Somewhere, a teacher's voice repeats a line until a student finally gets it right. The past survives as homework. That may sound unromantic, but it is precious. Many literary traditions were preserved because students copied them. Sacred stories passed through cramped hands, tired eyes, and the mild terror of disappointing one's instructor. If eternity has a desk, it probably has a stern teacher beside it. In Nippur, tablets preserved more than mythology. They preserved versions, variations, corrections, and competing traditions. A myth copied in one form could appear differently elsewhere. A hymn might praise one god with a grandeur that another city reserved for its own divine patron. Even ancient memory had local accents. Nothing is perfectly stable. This matters because the hidden timeline you are tracing does not come from one clean book. It emerges from many pieces. A damaged tablet here, a copied school text there, a line about creation, a list of gods, a hymn to a temple. A story where power moves between divine beings. Each fragment is small. Together, they become unsettling. A mainstream historical fact rests under the dust. Nippur was associated with Enlil, one of the most important gods in the Sumerian pantheon. Because of that sacred status, the city became a major religious and scribal centre. Texts from Nippur played an enormous role in preserving Sumerian literary tradition for later generations. The city gave memory a house. You stand near the imagined temple precinct, where walls once rose from sun-dried brick. The ground is uneven. Broken pottery lies half buried. A small shard catches the low light. It is nothing, and yet it is almost everything. Because ancient history often begins with someone noticing what most people would step over. A quirky tidbit waits in the schoolroom dust. Some student tablets contain awkward mistakes, repeated lines, and clumsy signs. Across 4,000 years, you can still sense a young scribe trying very hard and not quite succeeding. It is oddly comforting. Even the keepers of civilization had bad handwriting days. This human detail softens the grandeur. The tablets of Nippur do not float down from heaven in perfect silence. They pass through institutions, teachers, students, priests, collectors, and eventually archaeologists. Their survival is accidental and disciplined at the same time. They are sacred and messy, which is a very Mesopotamian combination. You lean closer to a broken tablet. The signs are impressed in neat rows, but the edge is missing. A name survives, a verb survives, a divine title survives. The missing portion creates a silence more powerful than any complete sentence. You can feel the story continuing beyond the break, but the clay refuses to give it back. There is an active scholarly debate about how to read these textual variations. Some researchers emphasize stable theological traditions preserved through scribal schools. Others stress the creativity of scribes and the changing needs of temples, cities, and royal patrons. The same myth could preserve ancient material while also serving later agendas. Both can be true. Ancient memory is not a sealed jar. It is more like water carried from vessel to vessel. Some spills, some changes taste, some remain surprisingly clear. By the time a story reaches a tablet in Nippur, it may already have lived in voices for centuries, altered by ritual, politics, and the simple human need to make meaning. That makes the records richer, not poorer. You begin to notice how authority works in these fragments. Gods are not isolated personalities. They exist within households, councils, cities, genealogies, and spheres of power. One deity commands storms, another controls wisdom, another governs writing, another receives offerings in a temple whose daily routines bind heaven to earth. The divine world is structured, yet beneath that structure the older forces remain visible. Water, clay, fate, labour, hunger, flood, darkness, and memory all press against the edges of the stories. The gods give commands, but they do so in a cosmos already thick with necessity. This is the quiet revelation of Nippur. The tablets do not merely tell you what people believed. They show belief being organised. They show sacred memory arranged into lists, songs, debates, and lessons. They reveal a civilization attempting to make the invisible teachable. You hear the reed stylus again. Press, lift, press, lift. The sound is almost like rain. Though the room is dry, each wedge fixes a word in place. Each word joins a tradition. Each tradition reaches toward an origin that cannot be held completely. In the temple courtyards, priests move through routine with careful steps. Water is poured, hands are washed, offerings are prepared. The scent of bread, beer, oil, and incense rises into the warm air. Ritual makes the unseen regular. It gives eternity a schedule. That sounds funny, but it is profound. Without repetition, sacred order fades. Without copying, stories disappear. Without institutions, memory becomes a thin voice in the wind. Nippur's power lies partly in its ability to repeat, preserve, and authorize. But preservation can also conceal. When a city becomes a center of learning, it shapes what survives. Some stories are copied often, others vanish. Some gods become central. Others drift into footnotes of clay, which is not a glamorous afterlife. The record we possess is therefore both gift and filter. You cannot forget that. The hidden timeline is not lying openly on the floor. It must be reconstructed from what institutions chose to keep, what accidents buried, and what modern excavations found. Every ancient answer carries the shadow of what is missing. Still, the fragments beneath Nippur whisper. They suggest that Mesopotamian thinkers inherited many strands of memory about beginnings. There were accounts of divine order, human creation, cosmic separation, temple foundation, and authority descending into the world. These strands did not always agree perfectly, yet together they formed a vast imaginative field. A field of old questions. Who first ordered the world? Who first carried the burden? Who taught humans the arts of living? What existed before the name powers took their seats? The tablets do not settle these questions. They preserve them. That may be more valuable than settling them. A complete answer closes the mind. A broken tablet invites it to wander carefully. Night gathers over Nippur. The schoolroom grows still. The lamp dies down. The last student leaves a tablet drying by the wall, perhaps proud, perhaps relieved, perhaps thinking only of supper. Outside, the temple remains dark against the stars. Under the dust, fragments wait, not silent, only patient. The flood arrives first as a change in the air. You feel it before you see it. The marsh birds quiet themselves. The wind turns heavy and wet, far away. Thunder rolls over the plain with a slow animal sound. The smell of rain rises from the earth, sharp and metallic, as if the sky has opened an old sealed jar. The boundary is coming. In Mesopotamian tradition, the Great Flood divides time into two regions. There is the world that existed before the waters rose, and there is the world that survives afterward. The Sumerian king list places impossible ancient rulers before the flood, then continues with kingship returning to the land once the waters pass. That structure matters. It turns disaster into a hinge. A mainstream historical fact stands beneath the story. Flood deposits have been found at several ancient Mesopotamian sites, though not all at the same date or scale. Archaeologists from major universities have studied how real river floods may have shaped local memory. The evidence does not prove one universal deluge, but it shows why flood stories felt believable in this landscape. Water was never imaginary here. It had weight, sound, smell, and consequence. It entered homes, ruined grain, drowned fields, shifted channels, and left thick mud where pathways had been. People living between rivers did not need to invent the terror of rising water. They only needed to remember it. You stand near Shurapak beneath a darkening sky. The city is still alive. Smoke lifts from ovens. A woman shakes grain in a basket. Children run past a doorway, their feet slapping damp ground. A potter covers his unfired vessels, muttering at the clouds with the courage of someone scolding weather. Then rain begins. At first, it is almost pleasant. Drops darken the dust. The smell of wet earth rises gently. Then the rhythm grows harder. Water strikes roofs, courtyards, animals, jars, reed fences, and bare shoulders. The drains fill. The streets turn slick. Voices call across the noise. The ordinary world starts losing its shape. In flood traditions, one figure is warned, prepares a vessel, survives, and carries life through destruction. The details vary across Sumerian and Akkadian versions, but the emotional pattern remains clear. Knowledge saves. Obedience saves. A fragile craft becomes the last moving point of order on a world of water. A quirky tidbit rests in the old story's practical side. Ancient flood narratives often include measurements, instructions, or lists of what must be preserved. Even apocalypse becomes partly an inventory problem. Humanity may panic, but someone still has to count the animals and pack correctly. That sounds almost comic. It is also deeply serious. Lists are how civilization resists chaos. Grain lists, worker lists, offering lists, king lists, and survival list all belong to the same instinct. When the waters rise, naming and counting become acts of defiance. They say that the world is not yet completely lost. You hear the flood now. It's not a wave in a painting. It is many sounds at once. Rain hammers, walls slump, animals cry, people shout names into darkness, wooden beams strain, river water rushes through places where streets should be. The city becomes a map dissolving in brown motion. Yet the myth is not only about fear, it is about separation. Before the flood, time is vast, strange, and populated by rulers whose reigns stretch beyond ordinary measure. After the flood, history becomes closer to human scale, though still wrapped in sacred meaning. The waters wash away not only people and cities, but a mode of time itself. Mythic time drowns. Human time returns. Scholars continue to debate how Mesopotamian flood stories relate to actual environmental events. Some emphasize memories of catastrophic local floods in the southern alluvium. Others focus on literary tradition, theology, and the flood as a symbolic reset of cosmic order. A careful reading allows disaster, memory, and meaning to flow together. The flood is both mud and metaphor. It is what happens when rivers overflow, and what happens when the past becomes too large to carry. It explains why the oldest world is unreachable. It gives a reason for broken continuity. It lets later people say that something once existed, but water stands between us and it. That is the emotional power of the boundary. You watch a vessel rise in the storm. It is dark, crowded, and terribly small against the flooded plain. Inside are breath, fear, seeds, animals, memory, and whatever remains of order. Outside is the water that has covered names. For a moment the world has no streets, no fields, no thresholds, only surface. This image unsettles because it returns creation to an earlier state. Dry land disappears beneath water, and the deep reclaims what had been shaped from it. Bricks dissolve back toward mud. Boundaries soften. Human order proves temporary. The ancient source shows its older authority. The flood says, all foundations are conditional. That is not loud. It is quiet and devastating. When the waters finally recede, they leave behind more than mud. They leave a changed relationship with memory. Those who survive inherit a broken past. They can tell stories of what came before, but they cannot walk back into it. The flood becomes the veil between known civilization and the older world. You step onto wet ground after the storm. Mud grips your feet. Broken reeds lie twisted along the bank. A jar floats in a shallow pool. A dead fire pit is packed with silt. The sky is suddenly clear, almost innocent, which seems rather unfair of it. Life resumes because it must. People scrape mud from floors. They search for tools. They count losses. They save what seeds remain. They rebuild walls that may one day fall again. Survival is not triumphant at first. It is tired, damp, and practical. The old records understand this. After the flood, kingship descends again. Authority returns, but it is not untouched. It comes into a world marked by catastrophe. The system continues, yet the memory of rupture remains inside it. Power is now post-flood power. Civilization is rebuilt on the far shore of loss. This gives the hidden timeline its most dramatic boundary. Before the flood lies the impossible past. Ancient cities, immense reigns, primeval sages, divine labour, and a world not fully remembered. After the flood lies the recoverable world, dynasties, inscriptions, temple economies, and historical kings moving gradually into clearer view. The water stands between them, not as an answer, as a curtain. You listen to the last drops falling from reed roofs. The plain smells washed and bruised. Frogs begin calling in new pools. Somewhere, a survivor lifts a tablet fragment from the mud and wipes it with careful fingers. The writing may be gone. The need to remember remains, and so the flood becomes more than destruction. It becomes the reason the earliest world feels ancient even to the ancients. It explains why the first age is dim, why its kings are enormous, why its cities seem chosen, and why its wisdom arrives from beings who stand close to the deep. The boundary holds. Beyond it, the old world is not denied. It is drowned, preserved, and hidden. Kings before the flood rule inside a time too large for footsteps. You see their names as marks on clay, small signs holding enormous reigns. The tablet does not tremble under the weight of those numbers. It simply records them, calm as a clerk writing down barley rations. That calmness is what makes the ancient list feel so strange. The impossible is written plainly. In the old sequence, rulers governed for thousands, even tens of thousands of years. These spans do not behave like ordinary lifetimes. They stretch beyond memory, beyond dynasties, beyond the patience of any sensible taxpayer. Time becomes ceremonial rather than practical, vast enough to belong to a world unlike your own. A mainstream historical fact grounds the wonder. The Sumerian king list is known from several ancient copies, and scholars have studied its changing versions for more than a century. It combines cities, rulers, reign lengths, and claims of legitimacy into a single powerful tradition. It is not a neutral document. It arranges the past. You stand in a dim scribal chamber while a copyist reads a royal name aloud. The room smells of lamp smoke, clay, and wool garments warmed by bodies. Outside, night presses against the walls. Inside, the past is being measured in numbers no human body could survive. That is the first clue. These reigns may not be intended as ordinary biography. They may announce distance. They may say that the earliest rulers belong to a grander, stranger order. They may use number as atmosphere, not arithmetic alone. The old kings become mountains of time. A quirky tidbit waits inside the mathematics. Some scholars have noticed that the huge reign lengths often fit patterns related to ancient numerical systems. The numbers may not be random exaggerations. They may be shaped, selected, and arranged with a scribble love of order that looks very mysterious to anyone who dislikes math. Even wonder can be calculated. There is an active debate over how to interpret these reigns. Some researchers view them as symbolic expressions of ancient prestige. Others see theological time, where the pre-flood world is magnified by sacred distance. Some cautiously ask whether faint memories of real rulers were expanded until history became myth. The safest answer is layered. A name can be historical, legendary, political, and sacred all at once. Ancient tradition does not always separate these as neatly as modern shelves prefer. A king may begin as a person, become an ancestor, then become a pillar holding up the imagined past. You walk through one of those vast reigns in your mind. No single palace can contain it. Generations are born, labour, age, and vanish, while one royal name remains fixed over the city. Canals are dug and cleared again. Temples are repaired. Children learn the names of rulers already ancient when their grandparents were young. A king becomes less a man than a season. Perhaps that is the point. Before the flood, kingship seems larger than individuals. It rests in a city with almost cosmic weight. The ruler is a vessel for authority descending from beyond ordinary life. His length of rule signals not personal stamina, which would be exhausting, but the immense stability imagined in the First Age. Too stable, perhaps. The flood will make that stability tragic. But within this older time, the reign suggests a world closer to divine order than human disorder. Cities hold power for ages. Rulers seem rooted in the fabric of creation. History has not yet broken into shorter, sharper pieces. Your mind drifts across the first city at night. A temple lamp burns without wind. Watchmen pace along walls. The king's name is spoken in offerings, disputes, contracts, and prayers. People may never see him closely, but his existence organizes their world. He is a point around which labour, ritual, fear, and loyalty turn. Royal power is practical and invisible. It commands workers, receives tribute, claims divine favour, and gives shape to collective memory. Yet in the pre-flood list, power also becomes almost geological. It lasts like a riverbed, like a mound, like a star watched across seasons. This creates a subtle unease. If early kings rule for impossible ages, then human history begins in distortion. The first political memory is not clear, it is enlarged, sacred and unreachable. The closer you move toward origins, the less human the scale becomes. That feels ancient because it feels distant. Modern history often grows clearer as records multiply. Sumerian sacred history grows mistier as it approaches the beginning. Names remain, but they stand inside fog. Numbers remain, but they behave like ritual architecture. A council decree proves that later Mesopotamian rulers cared deeply about legitimacy, divine favour, and inherited authority. Royal inscriptions show kings building temples, restoring cults, and presenting themselves as chosen servants of great gods. The king list belongs to that same broad hunger for ordered descent. It tells power where it came from, or where it wished it came from. You imagine a later ruler hearing the ancient list recited. He listens to cities before the flood, to reigns beyond belief, to kingship moving like a sacred treasure. His own reign suddenly stands inside a chain far older than his palace. That is useful. It makes today's authority feel woven into eternity. Politics loves a long memory, so do temples. If kingship descended from heaven long ago, then every later throne claims some relationship to that descent. The earliest kings become ancestral proof that rule belongs to the structure of the cosmos. Even when cities fight, each wants to stand closer to the first light of authority. Still, the impossible numbers resist simple propaganda. They do something more poetic. They announce that the first world cannot be entered with ordinary expectations. You cannot bring modern chronology into the pre-flood age and expect it to behave. The text makes time itself unfamiliar. This is the hidden gift. The numbers slow you down. They force you to stop asking only whether they are literal. They invite a better question. What kind of world needs kings this large? What kind of memory stretches reigns until they become sacred landscapes? Perhaps the answer is longing. Ancient people, like modern people, lived amid instability. Floods came, cities fought, dynasties collapsed, fields failed, children died, walls cracked. Against that fragility, the image of vast reigns offered a memory of order before rupture. It may be history as comfort. It may be history as warning. For if such ages could end, then nothing is permanent, not cities, not kings, not even the sacred arrangements that seem fixed above human heads. The flood does not merely interrupt a list, it humbles eternity. You look once more at the tablet. Small wedges, huge years, broken edges. A name survives from a world no one can reach. The clay carries the weight without explanation. It does not tell you whether to believe literally, symbolically, or somewhere between. It lets the question remain. Kings before the flood may be memory, myth, mathematics, theology, all of these folded together. They stand like dark statues at the entrance to history, guarding a time too vast to measure and too meaningful to dismiss. Their reigns are impossible. Their presence endures. The Anunnaki arrive late in the story, and that is the quiet surprise. You may expect the famous divine powers to stand at the very beginning, waiting in perfect command. Yet the older pattern suggests something more layered. Waters are already moving. Cities have already been imagined. Kingship has already descended. Labour has already troubled the divine world. The stage is not empty. When the Anunnaki appear in Mesopotamian texts, they belong to a larger divine society. They can be associated with judgment, authority, ancestry, and the assembly of great powers. Their exact role changes across periods and texts, which is inconvenient for tidy explanations, but very useful for truth. Ancient religion breathes and shifts. A mainstream historical fact anchors this point. Mesopotamian divine names and roles developed across centuries, moving through Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian traditions. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago treat these pantheons as evolving systems, not frozen lists carved once for all time. Their evolution matters. The Anunnaki do not array earlier depths. They occupy a cosmos already thick with waters, foundations, cities, duties, and memories of catastrophe. They are powerful, yes, but power here does not mean being first in every sense. A ruler can inherit an ancient house. You stand in a great assembly hall imagined from temple thought. The air smells of cedar smoke, oil, wool, and baked brick cooling after sunset. Lamps burn low along the walls. Shadows lengthen behind divine seats. No mortal body should be here, yet your dreaming mind pauses near the doorway, careful and quiet. The gods gather. Their presence feels heavy, not loud. They are not cartoon thunder hurlers. They are offices, forces, personalities, inheritances, and fears. Each carries a place in the structure. Each name has weight. Each silence has meaning. The Anunnaki are part of that order, but beneath their gathering, older questions stir. Who dug the first channels? Who set the first cities in sacred sequence? Who carried knowledge from the waters? What existed when authority itself had not yet settled into recognizable thrones? The assembly does not answer immediately. It listens. A quirky tidbit clings to modern fame. The Anunnaki have become wildly popular in fringe theories, often turned into ancient astronauts, genetic engineers, or hidden rulers from another planet. The actual ancient texts are far stranger in a quieter way. They show divine bureaucracy, cosmic hierarchy, and ritual obligation, which is less shiny but more haunting. Ancient gods had meetings, possibly too many meetings. That little modern joke should not distract from the depth of the idea. The divine assembly reflects a world where order is collective and negotiated, decisions are made, fates are assigned, roles are recognized. The cosmos operates less like a single voice shouting commands, and more like a court where power must be spoken, witnessed, and confirmed. There is an open scholarly debate about the term Anunnaki itself. Some researchers emphasize its connection to a group of major deities. Others note that its meaning and membership shift across texts and periods. In some traditions, the Anunnaki are linked with the underworld, while elsewhere they appear among high divine powers. The name is not simple. It is a door with several rooms behind it. You move deeper into the imagined chamber. The floor is cool beneath your feet. Incense drifts upward in slow blue threads. A scribe. Or perhaps the idea of a scribe records decisions on a tablet no human museum will ever hold. The sound of the stylus is soft, but final. Fate is being written. The Anunnaki's power lies partly in this atmosphere of judgment. They belong to the machinery of cosmic decision. Yet even judgment requires a world to judge. It requires boundaries, laws, living beings, dead beings, cities, offerings, offences, duties, and remembered beginnings. So their arrival feels like organisation, not origin. That is the hidden turn. Before a court can sit, something must bring the court into need. Before judges can decide, there must be disputes, destinies, and a framework of value. Before the Anunnaki take their places, the ancient imagination has already filled the cosmos with problems. Water must be restrained, labour must be assigned, humans must be shaped, cities must receive power, the flood must be survived. The great gods stand over these matters, but the matters themselves feel older than any one divine title. They are conditions of existence. They are the deep furniture of the world, heavy and difficult to move. Records confirm that Mesopotamian religion was strongly tied to temple service and city life. Gods had houses, statues, meals, festivals, and priestly attendants. The divine world was not remote from society. It was woven through storage rooms, kitchens, workshops, offering tables and calendars. The sacred was scheduled. That is almost funny, until you feel its seriousness. A god without offering was not merely neglected. The relationship between heaven and earth was strained. Ritual kept the channels open. The Anunnaki's world depended on human acts as much as human society depended on divine approval. Everything was relational. You begin to see why the idea of a world before the Anunnaki is not a denial of their importance. It is a way of recognizing depth beneath fame. The famous names stand near the surface of surviving tradition, but their roots sink into older images of waters, clay, labour, kingship, and memory. A tree is not only its branches. The Anunnaki's later prominence may have gathered earlier strands into a more formal structure. Divine authority becomes organised around family lines, assemblies, and ranked powers. The mysterious old world is not removed. It is absorbed, explained, managed, and sometimes hidden beneath divine titles. That process happens in human cultures all the time. Old spirits become saints. Local gods become aspects of greater gods. Ancient places receive new names. Older fears survive beneath newer prayers. Religion rarely begins from a blank page. It rewrites, layers, and remembers selectively. The Mesopotamian tablets show that process in clay. You look again toward the divine seats. They are imposing, but not original in the simplest sense. Behind them stands the watery deep. Beneath them lies the labour of gods and humans. Around them stretch cities that claim ancient favour. Beyond them waits the floodline, that great curtain of memory. The Anunnaki arrive into inheritance. That makes them more interesting. A power that inherits must also conceal what came earlier. It must present itself as natural, necessary, perhaps eternal. Yet the older fragments remain visible at the edges. They whisper that cosmic order had a prehistory, and that even divine hierarchy may have risen through stages. The room grows still. No answer is spoken in thunder. The assembly remains, solemn and remote. Yet the deeper truth has already shifted under your feet. The ancient world is not a simple ladder with the Anunnaki at the first rung. It is a buried city of meanings, with chambers beneath chambers, and in the lowest chambers, water moves, clay waits, labour breathes, memory sleeps. Heaven's assembly opens like a door carved into silence. You stand beneath a roof that seems higher than architecture should allow. The chamber is not bright, yet nothing is hidden. Lamps burn with small, steady flames. The air carries cedar, warm oil, wool, and the faint mineral smell of clay tablets drying near a wall. Power gathers by taking seats. This is one of the most revealing ideas in Mesopotamian religion. The gods do not only act alone, they assemble, deliberate, grant authority, and assign destinies. Scholars at major universities have long noted that divine councils mirror ancient social structures where kings, elders, temples, and households all shaped public order. The heavens have protocol. It is oddly comforting and faintly alarming. Even cosmic forces seem to need procedure. Someone speaks, someone agrees, someone records. Someone probably thinks the meeting could have been shorter, proving once again that civilization has deep roots. The assembly reveals structure. Here, divinity is not a mist of equal powers. It is ranked, organized, and relational. There are great gods, lesser gods, messengers, scribes, gatekeepers, judges, and servants. A divine command gains strength when recognized by the gathered powers. Authority is witnessed. That matters because a witnessed decision becomes more than personal will. It becomes order. The assembly turns desire into fate. It transforms argument into structure. It gives the cosmos a legal shape, even when the room exists only in sacred imagination. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Mesopotamian city life often depended on councils, assemblies, palace authority, and temple institutions. Ancient records show that decision-making could involve multiple social bodies, not only a single ruler. Religious imagination drew from that human experience and raised it into the divine realm. The sky resembles the city. You hear the faint scrape of a stylus. A divine scribe records decisions on a tablet, each sign sealing what has been spoken. The sound is small, but the effect is immense. A word becomes decree. A decree becomes destiny. Destiny becomes the road mortals must walk. The atmosphere is heavy with consequence. You notice how the gods are not merely personalities. They are offices of reality. One governs storm, one oversees wisdom, one guards writing, one watches justice, one opens gates, one knows the underworld roads. Together, they make existence feel administered, which is not always relaxing, but it is impressive. A quirky tidbit waits near the edge of the chamber. Mesopotamian myths sometimes make divine politics feel surprisingly familiar. With complaints, negotiations, rivalries, and formal speeches, the gods may be immortal, but their meetings occasionally resemble a very serious town council with better lighting. That humanity is not accidental. Ancient people understood power through households, cities, temples, and courts, so they imagined divine power through similar patterns. The cosmic system was grand because human systems were already meaningful. Heaven did not abolish society, it magnified it. There is scholarly debate about how directly divine assemblies reflect actual political institutions. Some researchers emphasize the influence of early city councils and royal courts. Others argue that the assembly is primarily theological, showing how divine authority becomes legitimate through collective recognition. The strongest reading lets both ideas breathe. Myth watches society. Society learns from myth. You move slowly around the edges of the imagined hall. The floor feels cool and smooth beneath your feet. The silence between speeches is almost physical. No one hurries. Ancient authority has time, and it uses slowness as part of its power. In that slowness, fate is shaped. The council does not merely answer questions. It defines the limits of what can happen. Kings may receive favour. Cities may rise. Humans may be assigned tasks. Floods may be permitted. Boundaries may be fixed between heaven, earth, and the realm below. The assembly is a machine of meaning, yet machines can hide their makers. Once a system feels eternal, people forget that it has a story. The divine council appears as the natural order of the cosmos, but the older fragments suggest that order was imagined through layers, waters, labour, cities, flood, and kingship all feed into this formal arrangement. The court stands above all depths. This is why the heavenly assembly feels like a reveal rather than a beginning. It shows how the scattered powers of the ancient world become organized into hierarchy. The universe gains rooms, roles, and ranks. The strange early forces are not gone. They are placed. Placement is power. To name a god and give that god a seat is to make the unseen governable. To rank divine beings is to make fear more orderly. To assign destinies is to turn the unknown future into something pronounced, recorded, and carried forward. You sense the comfort of this. You also sense the danger. If fate is written elsewhere, what does human freedom become? If gods decide in assembly, what can a farmer, widow, scribe, or shepherd truly change? Mesopotamian thought often lives inside that tension. Humans are small, yet ritual matters. Fate is powerful, yet prayer continues. People still bring offerings. They still weep. They still ask. That persistence is moving. It means that ancient religion did not reduce life to cold decree. Between divine decision and human suffering stood ritual, lamentation, praise, divination, and hope. The assembly might speak fate, but mortals kept speaking back. A council decree proves one thing above all. Order must be renewed through recognition. Ancient rulers needed public display, temple support, divine favour, and scribal memory. In mythic form, the gods also confirm authority through gathering. Power needs witnesses, even in heaven. The hall grows darker. One deity rises, another listens. A messenger waits by the doorway, ready to carry the decision into the world below. Outside this chamber, canals still need clearing, bread still needs baking, and children still need persuading to sleep. Cosmic decree must eventually touch ordinary dust. That descent is essential. A fate spoken in heaven becomes real only when it enters fields, bodies, cities, and time. The divine assembly may decide, but the earth bears the consequences. Sacred structure is never abstract for long. It becomes harvest, illness, victory, exile, childbirth, drought, or dream. You feel the old seriousness of that. For ancient listeners, the Divine Council explained why existence seemed ordered yet unpredictable. Decisions were made, but not always visible. Reasons existed, but not always kindly. The world was not random, yet it could still wound without warning. Perhaps that is more unsettling than chaos. Chaos needs no explanation. Order does. The assembly offers that explanation in solemn form. Somewhere beyond human sight, powers gather. They speak. They assign. They remember. Their decisions move through the world like underground water, unseen until something rises at the surface. You stand near the doorway again. The lamps burn lower. The tablet of fate lies somewhere inside the chamber. Imagined, desired, feared. You cannot read it. Perhaps no mortal should. Its unreadable surface is part of its authority. The hidden structure has shown itself only partly. There are seats, ranks, voices, and decrees. There is procedure. There is memory. There is a system by which the world becomes bearable, even when it remains frightening. And as the assembly fades into darkness, one thought remains quietly awake. The ancient world did not imagine power as lonely. It imagined power as gathered, witnessed, and written. The forgotten workers stand where the divine light grows thin. You do not meet them in splendid halls. You find them near canals, fields, storerooms, and unfinished walls, where the air tastes of mud and effort. Their hands are imagined, not human, yet they carry the same weariness that lives in shoulders after a long day. They are the lesser gods. In Mesopotamian myth, not every divine being sits in majesty. Some labour, some dig, some bear burdens within the cosmic order. Later traditions describe their exhaustion and revolt, a divine protest that helps lead to the creation of humans. Scholars from major universities have studied this as one of the clearest ancient reflections on work, hierarchy, and social strain. The myth notices inequality. That is important. The great gods command, but others perform the difficult tasks. The lower powers carry the weight that keeps the world functioning. They are divine, yet not free from obligation. Their status is higher than human, but their experience feels painfully familiar. You hear mud being cut. The sound is dull and wet. Baskets scrape against the earth. Water slaps softly against canal banks. A worker breathes out, pauses, then lifts again. The sky has not yet turned gold. The day is already old in the body. This is where humanity enters the system. Humans are made to take over the burden, to serve the gods and maintain their houses. Clay becomes flesh. Breath enters form. A creature is placed into the gap between divine command and earthly necessity. A mainstream historical fact steadies the scene. Administrative tablets from Mesopotamian cities record organized labor, rations, textile production, agricultural work, and temple service. Researchers at institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Chicago have shown how deeply labor systems shaped urban life. The myths are listening to society. They hear the tiredness of workers. They hear the power of overseers. They hear the dependence of temples on bodies that can be counted, fed, assigned, and replaced. Their myth lifts that pattern into the sky, where even gods have their own labor problem. A quirky tidbit rests in the clay. Some ancient texts describe humans being made through a mixture involving clay and divine substance, making people both humble and strangely charged. We are mud with a spark, which is either beautiful or a very dramatic description of poor workplace design. You smile softly. Then the thought darkens. If humans are made to relieve divine workers, then our purpose begins in substitution. We inherit someone else's burden. We arrive because another group has had enough. The first human breath may carry not triumph, but the echo of a complaint. That is unsettling, yet it also makes human life necessary within the cosmic household. The forgotten workers do not vanish from meaning. Their exhaustion becomes the reason humanity matters. Their refusal creates space for mortal existence. There is scholarly debate over how literally to read this divine labour revolt. Some historians interpret it as a theological explanation for why humans must serve the gods. Others see a reflection of social tension inside temple and palace economies. Some read it as an ancient meditation on fatigue, justice, and hierarchy. The debate is quietly alive. You stand beside a field at dawn. Mist lies low over the irrigation channels. A line of workers moves slowly, carrying tools and baskets. They are human now, not divine, but the rhythm remains. Bend, lift, carry, pour, return. The motions become almost ceremonial. Labour creates time. Morning is not merely a point on a clock, it is when water is drawn. Animals are led, bread is baked, and fields are opened. Evening is when tools are set down, fires are lit, and bodies remember their limits. The day is shaped by work more than by thought. The forgotten workers teach that order has a cost. Every temple courtyard swept clean hides sweeping. Every offering table set with bread hides grinding, baking and carrying. Every shining ritual object hides mining, carving, polishing, and repair. Sacred beauty rests on ordinary effort. The ancient world knew this. It did not imagine holiness without maintenance. A god's house needed food, clothing, washing, music, incense, and attention. Divine presence required human schedules. The system was grand, but it depended on hands. You enter a temple kitchen in your mind. Heat rises from ovens. Grain dust floats in the air. Beer jars line the wall. Someone kneads dough with steady pressure. Someone else measures portions. The smell is warm bread, sour mash, smoke, oil, and sweat. This is sacred service, though it looks like work. Because it is work. The boundary between worship and labour is thinner here than modern habits expect. To prepare bread for a god is ritual. To carry bricks for a temple is devotion. To clean a courtyard is maintenance and reverence together. This sacred does not float above fatigue. It inhabits it. Perhaps that is why the forgotten workers remain powerful. They reveal that hierarchy is not only about glory, it is about distribution of burden, who rests, who carries, who eats first, who is remembered by name, who becomes invisible inside the smooth functioning of the system. The ancient tablets often preserve rulers, gods, and great events. But behind those signs stand countless unnamed workers, women spinning wool, men clearing canals, children carrying small loads, brewers tending vats, potters firing vessels, scribes calculating rations, priests arranging offerings, shepherds counting animals under a hard sun. Their names may vanish, but their labour builds the world the records describe. You feel the rough edge of a basket strap. It bites into skin. The load is not heroic. It is simply heavy. That is the truth most civilizations prefer to decorate after the work is done. Monuments rise and later visitors admire the scale. The builders are usually elsewhere in the story, reduced to numbers or shadows. The lesser gods share that shadow. They are divine and forgotten, necessary and subordinate. Their presence suggests that even the cosmic order contains strain. The world before familiar human history is not peaceful perfection. It is already divided by rank, labour, pressure, and need. So humanity's role becomes double. Humans are servants, but also witnesses. They inherit work, but they also remember it through story. By telling of divine workers, ancient people gave sacred shape to exhaustion. They admitted that burden belongs near the roots of existence. That admission is almost compassionate. It says your tiredness is not meaningless. It belongs to an old pattern. Your aching back, your careful hands, your repeated tasks, your quiet service before dawn, all echo a mythic structure older than kings. The sun rises higher. The canal shines. The field opens. Someone laughs briefly, because even tired people laugh. Someone complains, because that too is part of civilization's sacred rhythm. Life continues, not in spite of labour, but through it. The forgotten workers fade into the brightness. Their tools remain. Their burden remains. Their story remains in the clay, reminding you that before humanity served the gods, another kind of worker had already grown weary beneath the weight of order. Monsters gather at the edges, where order thins into wilderness. You do not meet them in the middle of the city. You sense them beyond the last lamp, past the canal bank, beyond the fields where night insects begin their thin music. The air smells of dry grass, damp mud, animal musk, and smoke fading behind you. The boundary is alive. In Mesopotamian imagination, strange beings often occupy the margins of the ordered world. Some appear in myths as cosmic enemies, others stand in protective art, carved or moulded to frighten danger away. Scholars at major universities have studied these figures as signs of fear, protection, chaos, and sacred power. The ancient world had many borders. There was the border between city and steppe, between field and marsh, between living and dead, between human and divine, between named order and forces that refused ordinary naming. Monsters lived near those crossings, because crossings are where certainty becomes tired. You hear a nightbird cry. It sounds almost human for one breath. They're not human at all. A reed fence rattles. Something moves in the dark water. Your mind supplies shapes before your eyes can confirm them. That is how monsters begin. Not always with bodies, sometimes with uncertainty. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Mesopotamian art and texts include many hybrid creatures, including lion-headed beings, bird-bodied figures, serpent forms, and protective spirits placed near doors or thresholds. Archaeological finds show that such images were part of a ritual protection and symbolic order. The monster was not always an enemy. Sometimes it guarded the house. That is a wonderfully ancient contradiction. The frightening thing protects you from something worse, A fierce face is placed in a doorway to stop unseen harm from entering. Terror is turned outward, like a dog with divine paperwork. You stand before a doorway in a mud brick house. A small protective figure has been buried near the threshold. Its form is strange, perhaps human and animal together. It lies hidden from ordinary sight, but its purpose is clear. The household sleeps because danger has been addressed. Not defeated, exactly, addressed. A quirky tidbit comes from later Mesopotamian protective traditions, where ritual experts used figurines of strange beings in foundations, walls, and entrances. These were not toys, unless one had a deeply unsettling nursery. They were tools of invisible security, placed where ordinary locks could not work. The threshold needed guardians. So did the cosmos. In myths, monstrous figures can represent disorder older than the present arrangement. They are not merely random beasts. They carry the memory of forces that existed before boundaries were fixed. Serpents, storms, sea creatures, demons of illness, and night beings all remind humans that order is made, not guaranteed. You walk farther from the city. The ground changes underfoot. It is rougher here, scattered with scrub and broken reed. The smell of animals grows stronger. A jackal calls in the distance. The stars are clearer, but less comforting. Behind you, the city lamp seems small. This is where old fear waits. Ancient people knew that outside settled land, danger was real. Predators, bandits, fever, marsh sickness, lost paths, and sudden storms could erase confidence quickly. Myth transformed that landscape into figures with teeth, wings, claws, and names whispered carefully. There is scholarly debate about how to interpret these beings. Some researchers read them as personifications of natural threats and illness. Others emphasize their ritual function as protective powers. Some view them as remnants of older mythic layers absorbed into organized religion. The debate itself is fitting. A monster resists a single category. It can be enemy, guardian, memory, warning, and symbol at once. It can stand for chaos while serving order. It can frighten children and comfort parents, which is an impressive range for one carved creature. You imagine the wilderness before dawn. Mist lies low over the marsh. The water is still. Then something breaks the surface, only once. Ripples move outward and vanish. You never see the body. You do not need to. The unseen does more work than the seen. The hidden timeline becomes darker here. If the Anunnaki represent organized divine authority, the monsters suggest what remains outside organization. They are the leftovers of older unease. They live where divine decree is not fully settled, or where human beings fear it might fail. Every system has an edge. The ancient city knows this. Its walls, gates, rituals, and protective figures all admit the same truth. Order does not exist everywhere equally. It must be marked, guarded, renewed, and defended from erosion. A field is cleared, weeds return, a canal is dredged, silt returns, a doorway is blessed, fear returns. This repetition is not failure. It is life inside a world that never stays arranged for long. The monsters are reminders of that restless condition. They say that beneath the official order of gods and kings, the raw powers of night, sickness, hunger, and wild land still breathe. You hear sandals on packed earth behind you. A ritual specialist moves toward a house at dusk. He carries water, clay, words, and small objects prepared for protection. His work is practical in its own way. Just as a canal worker manages water, the ritual worker manages unseen danger. Both deal with overflow. That comparison matters. Ancient religion did not separate danger into neat physical and spiritual boxes. A fever, a bad dream, a snake near the doorway, a failed birth, an eclipse, or a strange cry at night could all belong to a world of signs and powers. The monster gave fear a body. A body can be named. A named thing can be faced. That is one hidden mercy of frightening figures. They concentrate anxiety into form, A household may not understand every invisible threat, but it can place a guardian, recite a ritual, and sleep with the sense that something has been done. Not certainty, but comfort. The monsters at the edges also reveal humility. Cities may claim sacred favour. Kings may list their victories. Temples may rise in careful tears. But beyond the lamplit centre lies a darkness that does not care about human pride. The wilderness is unimpressed. So is disease. So is death. Mesopotamian stories often know this better than triumphal inscriptions admit. They understand that civilization is fragile. It is a circle of light in a large, dark place. That does not make the light false. It makes it precious. You look back toward the city. Its lamps flicker like low stars. Smoke rises from evening meals. Children sleep. Workers rest. Priests close temple doors. Somewhere, a small protective figure lies buried under a threshold, doing its silent duty in the dark. Beyond the wall, something calls again. Perhaps it is only an animal. Perhaps it is memory wearing an animal's voice. Perhaps it is the old world reminding the ordered city that not everything has been seated, named, and assigned. The monsters remain, not because people were foolish, because they were honest. They knew that the world before order had not vanished completely. It had retreated to marsh, desert, dream, illness, storm, and night. It waited at the edges, where the fields ended and the oldest fears lifted their heads. And there, beneath the stars, the boundary keeps breathing. Scholars and shadow theories bend over the same clay, but not in the same light. You're in a reading room now, far from the marsh and temple smoke. The air smells of paper, polished wood, old dust, and faint coffee cooling beside a stack of notes. A tablet rests under careful light, its broken surface holding signs that refuse to become simple. This is where patience matters. Modern Assyriology studies Sumerian and Akkadian texts through grammar, archaeology, comparison, and cautious reconstruction. Scholars at places such as Yale, Oxford, Harvard, and the University of Chicago have spent generations reading these tablets without turning every mystery into a secret door. That caution is earned. A broken sign can change a sentence. A missing edge can change a myth. A copied tradition can preserve an ancient idea while also carrying the assumptions of a later school. The work is slow, demanding, and not always glamorous, unless one finds damaged grammar glamorous, which some blessed people apparently do. Then come the shadow theories. They gather around the same words: Anunnaki, flood, sages, kings before the flood, creation from clay, knowledge from the deep. Fringe writers often connect these fragments into hidden civilizations, vanished technologies, visitors from the sky, or secret histories older than accepted archaeology. The appeal is easy to understand. The tablets already feel mysterious. They speak of huge ages, divine workers, strange teachers, and a world before remembered history. Add a little modern imagination, and suddenly every gap becomes a tunnel with dramatic lighting. A quirky tidbit sits right there. The fish-cloaked sages and impossible rains have inspired countless speculative claims, even though ancient scribes likely understood them through sacred tradition, mathematics, ritual authority, and mythic time. Still, the images are so vivid that modern fantasy almost writes itself. The problem is not wonder. Wonder is necessary. The problem is certainty without evidence. Ancient texts deserve more respect than being forced to confirm whatever modern theory arrives wearing the loudest boots. A tablet is not a blank screen. It has language, context, genre, and history. There is real debate among scholars, but it sounds different from fringe certainty. Researchers argue about dates, meanings, textual layers, political use, and mythic symbolism. They disagree carefully, with footnotes, museum numbers, and the occasional silent suffering known only to those who translate damaged lines. That debate is alive and useful. It keeps the clay from becoming a monument to one answer. It allows myth to remain myth, history to remain history, and uncertainty to remain honest. The ancient world becomes richer when it is not flattened into either literal fantasy or dry dismissal. You look through a magnifying lens. The wedges deepen, their shadows sharpen. A sign that seemed clear becomes uncertain. A damaged corner hides a name. The tablet is no longer an object of vague mystery. It is a difficult witness. That phrase matters. A witness can speak truthfully and still incompletely. It can remember one angle and not another. It can be damaged, copied, shaped, and partial. The tablets are witnesses, not servants of our wishes. Records confirm that many Mesopotamian myths survive in versions written long after the traditions may have begun. That makes interpretation delicate. A text can hold ancient memory, scribal theology, school exercise, and political meaning together. It can be old and late at once. Ancient evidence is layered. The fringe imagination often wants one hidden truth beneath everything. Scholarship usually finds something harder. Many truths, overlapping. A city is real. A sacred claim is theological. A number is symbolic. A flood may echo local disaster. A myth may preserve social anxiety. All can coexist. It is less tidy. It is more human. You sit quietly as rain taps against a modern window. The sound recalls ancient water without needing to become proof of anything. Across the table, a scholar compares copies of the king list. Another studies signs in a hymn. Another traces how a divine name changes across centuries. Slow work can be beautiful. It lets the past resist being consumed too quickly. It lets ancient people remain ancient, not merely actors in modern fantasies. They had their own fears, jokes, politics, rituals, and ways of thinking. They were not waiting thousands of years to validate our theories. Rather inconsiderate of them, but understandable. The shadow theories still reveal something important. They show that modern people continue to hunger for hidden origins. We want to believe the oldest records contain a secret explanation for everything. Power, civilization, labour, memory, and our strange restlessness under the stars. That hunger is not foolish. It is human. But hunger needs discipline. Without discipline, mystery becomes noise. With discipline, mystery becomes depth. The difference is not coldness, it is care. You turn back to the tablet. The clay is small enough to hold, yet large enough to trouble centuries. It contains no glowing machine, no perfect map of lost empires, no simple confession from beings beyond the sky. It contains something better, an ancient mind trying to order existence through story. That is already miraculous. A mainstream historical fact rests calmly here. Cuneiform writing preserved one of the longest continuous textual traditions in human history, lasting for more than 3,000 years across changing languages and empires. Scientific studies of tablets, archaeological contexts, and scribal schools continue to refine how these texts are understood. The endurance alone is staggering. Imagine a sign pressed by a hand that never dreamed of electric light, museum glass, or late-night viewers listening softly in distant rooms. That sign travels through collapse, burial, excavation, translation, argument, and imagination. It arrives still asking to be read carefully. Perhaps the true hidden world is not a lost planet or secret machine. Perhaps it is the mental world of the scribes themselves. Their categories are not ours. Their time is not ours. Their gods are not metaphors in the modern sense, yet not simple characters either. Their myths carry social memory, ritual truth, and cosmic anxiety in one breath. To enter that world, you must move slowly. You must allow the strange to remain strange. Scholars and dreamers both sense that the tablets open onto something vast. The difference lies in what each does next. The careful reader follows evidence into uncertainty. The careless reader turns uncertainty into certainty too quickly. The clay prefers patience. It has waited this long. Under the reading room lamp, the ancient signs cast tiny shadows. They look like valleys on a miniature landscape. You realize that every wedge is both mark and absence, both meaning and cut. Writing itself is a wound made useful. That is a strange comfort. The tablets do not give up their world easily. They ask for language, history, humility, and imagination held in balance. They let you feel the pull of the hidden timeline without demanding that you pretend to know more than the evidence allows, and so the oldest mystery remains alive. Not because it has been solved, but because it has survived both dust and exaggeration. The clay waits, the scholars read, the shadows gather near the lamp, the tablet as dream rests beneath your gaze, quiet as a sleeping animal. You do not treat it as a dead object, you let it become a threshold. Its surface is dry, cracked, and the colour of old honeyed earth. The wedges sit in rows, but they seem to move when the lamp flickers, like footprints crossing a shore at dusk. Writing preserves. Writing also changes. That is the first soft complication. The moment a spoken story becomes clay, it gains endurance, but it loses breath. The singer's pause vanishes. The gesture of a hand disappears. The changing tone of an old priest's voice falls away, leaving signs that must carry everything alone. Clay is faithful. Clay is incomplete. A mainstream historical fact steadies the dream. Mesopotamian scribes copied literary and religious works for centuries, and many surviving tablets are later copies of older traditions. Research from leading universities has shown how scribal schools preserve texts through repeated copying, training, and interpretation. So the tablet is not only a record, it is a performance repeated by another hand. You imagine a young scribe pressing signs into damp clay. His stylus is cut from reed. His teacher watches with the severe patience of someone guarding civilization through grammar. The room smells of mud, oil smoke, sweat, and drying tablets. Outside, a donkey makes an opinion known. The line is copied, then copied again. Each copy is an act of memory and risk. A sign may be misread. A phrase may be updated. A damaged original may force a guess. A teacher may prefer one version. A temple may preserve another. The story survives, but survival has fingerprints. This is why a tablet resembles a dream. It is real, solid, and measurable. It can be weighed, photographed, catalogued, and placed in a museum drawer. Yet the world inside it is unstable, layered, symbolic, and full of missing rooms. You can touch the object, but not the voice that first gave it life. A quirky tidbit appears in the scribal world. Some practice tablets show uneven signs, awkward spacing, and repeated exercises, making ancient education feel suddenly familiar. Across thousands of years, you can almost hear a student thinking, surely this is enough copying for one lifetime. Apparently it was not. The scribal tradition demanded repetition because repetition protected memory. In a world where wood rotted, leather decayed, and voices died, clay became a stubborn companion. It carried mistakes, prayers, myths, accounts, and royal pride with equal seriousness. That equality is strange. A rationalist and a creation story may both survive in clay. One tells you how grain was distributed, the other tells you how existence was imagined. Together, they reveal a civilization where the sacred and practical lived side by side, not in separate rooms. You lean closer. A broken edge interrupts the text. The missing part does not feel empty. It feels like a covered face. The tablet speaks, then stops. The silence asks you to imagine, but not too much. It invites patience, not possession. There is active scholarly debate about how much authority to give any single surviving version of a myth. Some specialists emphasize the importance of variant copies, while others reconstruct broader traditions from scattered fragments. The old stories often survive as families of texts, not as one final version. That matters deeply. Modern readers often want the story, singular and complete. Ancient evidence usually gives a story, one witness among several. The difference is small in grammar and enormous in meaning. A tablet may preserve a tradition without exhausting it. The dream has more than one doorway. You think of truth now, and the word becomes softer, not weaker. softer. Ancient mythic truth does not always behave like courtroom evidence. It can carry social truth, ritual truth, political truth, emotional truth, and cosmic speculation in the same sentence. A god creates, a city receives power, a flood divides time, a human is shaped from clay. These statements do not sit flatly on the page. They rise and turn. They tell ancient listeners where they stand in relation to work, fear, authority, death, and the unseen. Their truth is not simple, but it is not nothing. The tablet holds longing as well. Every preserved myth suggests that someone feared forgetting. Every copied hymn suggests that a voice wished to continue. Every list suggests that order mattered enough to write down. Even bureaucracy, bless its dry little heart, is a form of anxiety about loss. You imagine shelves of tablets in a temple archive. They are not shelves like modern wood, perhaps baskets, niches, rooms, and storage places. Dust gathers. Insects move in corners. A door opens, and light falls across rows of clay. The archive smells of earth, reeds, wool, and age. Inside it, memory sleeps in plural. One tablet remembers offerings, another remembers a god's praise, another remembers a king's name, another remembers a flood, another teaches a student the signs for animals, stones, professions, and divine beings. The world becomes sortable, yet sorting is not the same as understanding. A list can arrange divine names without explaining divinity. A myth can narrate creation without removing the ache of origin. A tablet can preserve words while the living world that made them disappears. That disappearance is the dream's sorrow. You can read the signs, but you cannot return the scribe's breath. You can translate a line, but you cannot fully rebuild the night when it was first recited. You can compare manuscripts, but you cannot recover every vanished version whispered beside a hearth. Still, something crosses. Not everything is lost. The tablet lets you stand near an ancient mind as it tries to hold the unholdable. It lets you see how people shaped fear into story, labor into purpose, kingship into descent, catastrophe into boundary, and clay into a memory machine. That is a kind of miracle, a quiet one. The tablet as dream is not an escape from history. It is history in its most fragile form. Solid enough to survive fire and burial, fragile enough to break in one careless hand, clear enough to speak, broken enough to keep secrets. You sit with that contradiction. The lamp grows lower, the shadows of the wedges lengthen. The signs seem less like writing now and more like tiny doors in a wall. Some open, some remain sealed, some lead only into darkness, but even darkness can have shape. Perhaps this is why ancient records feel so alive at night. They do not simply tell you what was believed. They show you how memory behaves when it's afraid of vanishing. They reveal truth, error, revision, devotion, and longing pressed into one small surface of earth. The tablet does not dream alone. You dream with it. What came before memory waits in the place where language grows thin. You stand beyond the last clear tablet line, where broken signs give way to dust. The air is still, and the world feels older than explanation. No king speaks here. No scribe lifts his reed. No city lamp marks the dark. There is only depth, not emptiness, but a kind of crowded silence. It is filled with waters, unnamed powers, vanished settlements, forgotten rituals, and human voices that never reach clay. The oldest world is not gone because it was meaningless. It is gone because most lives leave no durable mark. That is the ache of history. A mainstream historical fact stands quietly beneath it. Archaeology shows that human communities lived in Mesopotamia long before the earlier surviving writing. Villages, tools, graves, pottery, and buildings reveal deep human presence before texts begin. Research from leading universities has shown that writing arrives late in a much longer story. So memory begins before records, but records change memory. Once writing appears, the past gains a new kind of shadow. People can list kings, preserve hymns, copy myths, and argue with ancestors across centuries, yet everything before writing becomes harder to hear. It survives through earth, objects, bones, seeds, walls, and later stories that may remember while also transforming. You walk through a village without tablets. The morning smells of hearth smoke, damp soil, goat hair, and crushed herbs. Someone shapes a pot by hand. Someone repairs a roof. Someone buries a child with care too deep for words. No scribe records the grief, yet the grief is real. History does not begin when writing begins. Only written history does. That difference matters. The hidden timeline is not only divine, it is human. There were generations before the famous names, before the formal lists, before kingship became a sacred phrase, before gods were arranged in learned catalogues. People watched floods, stars, births, deaths, animals, storms, and the stubborn moods of soil. They made meaning. A quirky tidbit rests in the deep past. Some prehistoric clay tokens, used long before full writing, may have helped track goods and quantities. Before tablets spoke in signs, small objects may have carried memory in the hand. Bureaucracy, it seems, was stretching its tiny fingers very early, even counting as ancestors. Those tokens remind you that memory often begins with need. How many sheep? How much grain? Which jar belongs to whom? Practical questions become systems. Systems become marks. Marks become writing. Writing becomes myth's shelter. But before the shelter, there is weather. You imagine stories told beside a fire, lost forever because no clay received them. A grandmother speaks of a flood her grandmother heard about. A hunter describes lights in the sky. A ritual leader explains why a spring must be respected. A child listens, half afraid and half asleep. Those stories vanish, or perhaps they do not vanish completely. Perhaps their shapes survive inside later myths, changed beyond recognition. A real flood becomes the flood. A skilled teacher becomes a sage from the waters. A powerful settlement becomes a first city. A buried ruler becomes a king before the flood. There is scholarly debate about how much prehistoric memory can survive in later written tradition. Some researchers are cautious, warning that myths cannot be mined carelessly for facts. Others believe stories may preserve echoes of ancient environmental events, migrations, or social changes. The careful path remains open but narrow. You walk it slowly. The world before memory is not available for conquest. It cannot be forced to confess. It can only be approached through traces, a seed in ancient soil, a wall beneath a wall, a change in pottery, a mythic number, a god linked to waters, a city remembered as first. Each clue is partial. Together they form atmosphere. The hidden timeline becomes less certain here, but more haunting. Certainty would be smaller. Uncertainty allows the deep past to keep its scale. It reminds you that ancient people also inherited mysteries. The Sumerians themselves looked backward into a dimness they could not fully explain. They too had an ancient past. That thought is easy to miss. To you. Sumer feels close to the beginning. To them. Beginnings were already remote. They had ruins, older customs, inherited names, and traditions whose origins had faded. They stood not at the first page, but on a page already written over. The past was ancient to the ancients. You pause beside a mound under moonlight. Its surface is quiet, but beneath it lie floors, ashes, bones, beads, tools, and collapsed rooms. The mound is a memory without sentences. It does not tell you what happened. It holds the fact that something happened. That is enough to humble the mind. Language loves to claim things. It names, explains, arranges, and sometimes oversteps. But deep time resists full arrangement. It lets you see that every origin story is also a confession of distance. People tell beginnings because beginnings are already gone. The Sumerian records reveal a world before the Anunnaki not by giving one secret report, but by showing layers of older imagination. Waters before thrones, labour before humans, cities before empire, kings before ordinary time, sages before schools, monsters before boundaries were safe. Each layer points downward, not to one final chamber, to another layer. Perhaps this is the oldest human discovery. There is always something before. Before your city, another settlement. Before your god's temple, an older shrine. Before your language, another voice. Before your memory, another silence. The thought is unsettling but gentle. It does not erase meaning. It deepens it. Your life does not become smaller because others lived before you. It becomes part of a long, dim procession of breath, work, fear, tenderness, hunger, and wonder. You feel that procession now. It moves through marsh paths, temple courts, schoolrooms, flood mud, city gates, and forgotten villages. It passes through hands shaping clay, lighting lamps, lifting baskets, burying loved ones, and pressing signs into damp earth. Most names are gone. The movement remains. What came before memory is not a blank. It is a crowded night beyond the lamp. You cannot see every face there, but you can sense their presence. You can feel the old world breathing behind the records, behind the gods, behind the first written claims of order. And perhaps that is why the tablets still trouble the sleep of history. They do not merely say, "This is what happened." They whisper, "Much came earlier." The story still sleeps beneath the clay, breathing where certainty cannot follow. You stand once more under the wide Mesopotamian night, where the plain stretches outward in low shadow. The air is cool now. Reeds whisper in the marsh. A faint smell of ash, damp earth, and distant water lingers around you. Nothing speaks loudly here. The ruins do not announce their secrets. The tablets do not rise and explain themselves. The old gods do not step forward with a final answer. Instead, everything remains partly hidden, arranged in layers of silence, like a dream too old to wake completely. A mainstream historical fact remains steady. Sumerian civilization left one of humanity's earliest written archives, and those clay records reshaped how scholars understand cities, religion, labour, law, and memory. Research from major universities continues to refine that picture through archaeology, language study, and careful comparison, yet the deeper mystery remains open. The records reveal a world already ancient before the famous divine names take their familiar places. They hint at waters before authority, cities before empire, workers before mankind, kings before ordinary time, and teachers rising from the margins of memory. Each hint is small. Together they become immense. You walk slowly across the mound. Broken brick crunches beneath your feet. A pale moon rests above the flat horizon. Somewhere in the darkness, water touches reed stems with a sound so soft it nearly disappears. The ancient world feels unfinished. That unfinished quality is not a weakness. It is the reason the story endures. A fully solved past would become a closed room. This past remains a corridor, dimly lit, with doorways opening into other doorways. A quirky tidbit lingers beside the solemnity. Ancient scribes preserved cosmic mysteries on the same material used for receipts, ration lists, and school exercises. Humanity placed divine secrets and sheep records into clay with equal seriousness, which feels both absurd and wonderfully honest. That is civilization. You count grain, you question creation, you complain about labour, you look toward heaven. Scholars continue to debate how these records should be understood. Some read them as theology shaped by temples. Some emphasize political memory. Some trace ecological fears, especially floods and water. Some listen for echoes of older oral traditions buried beneath later copies. No single answer holds everything. Perhaps that is fitting. The ancient records themselves are not single-voiced. They are a chorus of scribe, their priests, students, rulers, workers, and dreamers. Their world is not one flat story, but a landscape of overlapping meanings. You pause near an imagined threshold. Behind you lie cities, king lists, floodwaters, divine assemblies, and clay bodies shaped for service. Ahead lies only darkness, not empty darkness, but the kind that holds stars. The hidden timeline does not end. It fades. That fading matters. It tells you that human knowledge has edges, even with tablets, excavations, museums, dictionaries, and patient scholarship. The first worlds remain partly beyond reach. The oldest memories survive in fragments because all memory is fragile. Clay breaks. Languages sleep. Cities sink. Names vanish. Still, something survives. A wedge in clay. A temple foundation. A flood story. A list of impossible kings. A strange teacher from the waters. A myth of humans shaped for work, yet capable of wonder. That may be enough. The story does not need to become certainty to become meaningful. It asks only that you listen slowly, without forcing it into either disbelief or fantasy. It asks that you let the ancients remain strange, dignified, practical, frightened, brilliant, and human. You breathe in the night air. The marsh answers with its soft movement. The stars seem close enough to enter the water. The old world rests beneath you, not dead, not awake, but present in the way buried things remain present. Perhaps the world before the Anunnaki was never one world. Perhaps it was many worlds layered together. Ecological memory, sacred imagination, political order, lost settlements, priestly teaching, and the human need to explain why life demands so much labour. Perhaps the tablets reveal not a final secret, but a method of remembering. They show how ancient people placed themselves between clay and sky. They saw that water could create and destroy. They saw that cities rose from mud and returned to it. They saw that power required story. They saw that work needed meaning. And so they wrote. They wrote lists. They wrote hymns. They wrote myths. They wrote names too large for time. They wrote because forgetting was always close. The night grows softer. Your steps slow. The mound becomes less distinct. The temple walls return to earth. The divine assembly dissolves into starlight. The kings before the flood become shadows behind a curtain of rain. Only the clay remains, only the breath of water. Only the question, what existed before memory learned to write itself down? No tablet answers fully. No ruin gives a complete map. The ancient records offer fragments, and fragments can be kinder than conclusions. They leave room for reverence. They leave room for humility. They leave room for sleep. You listen one last time. The world is quiet, but not silent. Beneath the dark soil, old foundations hold their shape. Beneath the foundations, older ground waits. Beneath the ground, the imagined waters move, patient and deep. And perhaps, somewhere in that depth, the story is not yet complete. Now the night becomes gentler. The questions loosen their grip. The tablets return to their shelves. The ruins fade into a soft horizon, and the ancient plain becomes only a quiet landscape under stars. You do not need to solve every mystery now. You can let the old world rest where it has rested for thousands of years, beneath dust, beneath moonlight, beneath the slow breathing of the earth. The clay has carried its memory far enough for one night. You may set down the burden of kings, gods, floods, and forgotten workers. You may leave the marsh reeds to whisper among themselves. The rivers continue without asking for your answer. The stars remain patient above the dark fields. Your breathing slows. The room around you becomes calm. The ancient wind grows distant. The last lamp in the temple dims, and the final scribe closes his hand around the reed stylus no more. Nothing is demanded of you now. Only rest. Only quiet. Only the soft sense that history is still there, sleeping beneath everything familiar. And if dreams come, let them be gentle ones. Clay cooled by night air. Water shining under stars. A small city lamp burning beside a river, and voices too old to understand murmuring not in fear, but in peace. The story remains unfinished, so may your thoughts grow unfinished too, drifting lightly away until even the oldest questions become part of the dark, warm silence. End of script. Good night.